He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, May 5th, 2025, the 106th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Happy Cinco de Mayo, if you're celebrating. And I guess celebrating Cinco de Mayo in America just means you're drinking, which is all right. I mean, except if you care about what the holiday's for. And most Americans don't. They're like, this is the day of Mexican independence. No. Celebrates the Battle of Pueblo, if memory serves. I didn't look it up. I'm not doing a bit on Cinco de Mayo today. It was just important when you live in Southern California for a long time. And Cinco de Mayo is like the biggest holiday of the year after, I guess, I would say New Year's Eve is probably first. Halloween. Cinco de Mayo's up there with like 4th of July. It's a big deal. Partly because there's a massive Mexican population, but partly because people don't really have day jobs. So having an excuse to drink all day long, huge advantage. It's also the anniversary of the day that Trump shared his taco bowl. And people have gotten very excited about that. And good for them. I love a taco bowl. So I'm back. Been a week. I apologize for that. I was in Plymouth, Massachusetts for Badlands Media's Great American Restoration Tour event, the 8th of those. Apparently there's an American Restoration Tour started by, I don't know, but it looks like a shill fest. It's happening in Beverly Hills or something. I wonder where they got the name. Oh, they probably just thought of it themselves. I'm just kidding. But so that was a great time. As always, thank you all so much if you came or if you watched virtually and participated or sent messages in my chat or whatever else. Thank you for supporting that venture. I think we had a lot of fun. We had some really great discussions. I was able to speak for the first time to Matt Ehret. We'd be in chats and stuff, and we did a GART live stream leading up to the event, but didn't really have a conversation between the two of us. So what you saw for about an hour and 15 minutes on the stage on Friday was one of the first times we've ever talked. We caught up for about 10 minutes prior to going on. And I had a pretty good idea of how thorough his historical knowledge is because, of course, he does a show with Bass Patrick Henry, Ghost of Bass Patrick Henry. But I had never had a chance to speak to him. I didn't know if we were aligned about a bunch of things. It turns out that we are about some really critical things, and that was awesome. And I think we had a great talk, some other great panels over the weekend. We had some fun on Devolution Power Hour. But thank you everybody so much for coming. Thank you for the people who brought gifts. I love that. I mean, I'm not saying bring me more gifts, but I really do appreciate those kinds of contributions and the thoughtfulness that goes along with them. So thank you very much. Aside from it being a great trip in terms of the conference and seeing my Badlands friends and whatnot, getting there was terrible. And it kind of, every time I deal with the airlines, it gets worse from the last time. There's no point in the last 10 years where I'm like, oh, wow, it seems like they've fixed something. It's only It seems like things are way worse even than the last time. And last time was terrible. And that is true of a lot of our society right now. And I was delayed for 9 hours the other day. Did not get in. Did not actually rest my head down on the pillow till 4 a.m. at the hotel. We were supposed to be there at 7 p.m. So that was a disaster. My initial flight got canceled for weather. Maybe it was from where I was flying out of, but maybe somewhere else, because there were still flights flying out of where I was. And I noticed as my flight got then rescheduled and then that flight got delayed for 5 hours. Hey, there's something wrong with this system. And I spoke about it a bit over the weekend. I think of it now, that system, as I think of Christmas lights when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s. And if one went out, they would all go out. One Christmas light breaks or just dies, the whole chain of Christmas lights is absolutely screwed. And then if they are replaceable, you have to go through link by link trying to figure out exactly which light bulb was having the problem and make sure that one is replaced. And then maybe you've salvaged the whole thing. But the airlines seem kind of like that. They're basically like, oh, we have weather. Okay, but flights are leaving. So is it the weather? Like, well, it's weather elsewhere. Weather elsewhere. Yeah, we need those planes. You don't have planes. You're an airline. You're supposed to have planes. Now, I don't know this to be true, but I think that it used to be true. And maybe if one of you is an airline pilot or very familiar or well-studied with the airlines, I think that they used to have planes in hangars that they could use if other planes didn't show up. Maybe there's also the pilot crews. I understand that there's more steps than just that. But a system should not be so organized for efficiency and exactness that if there's a problem somewhere, then the entire thing begins to immediately collapse. And that is what's happening with the airlines. If something gets messed up in one city, those effects are compounding all around the country. And all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of travelers are totally screwed. Their bags go off to the wrong places. Their flight gets canceled. They can't attend the business meeting they had planned. People plan in advance, weeks or months at a time, and then they're totally screwed. It is a terrible system. And I think it's just, again, an example of what the global regime system has become. This is considered progress. Now it's efficient, you see. And I have a sneaking suspicion, by the way, that if they determine that their flights aren't full and that they can get everybody where they need to be within a quote unquote reasonable amount of time, then why not just cancel a flight and then have the system reroute everybody onto these other flights? They'll all make it. It'll turn out okay in the end, and the airline benefits. I have no reason to believe that's not true. I don't know it is true, but it seems like something they would do. They care about customers, not at all. It's actually just such a crazy business, and it's the only way it's able to operate that way is A, it's federally regulated and controlled, and B, they have a monopoly on travel. What are you going to do? Not travel anymore? Not travel long distances? I mean, I try to travel by car when I can. I've redeveloped an affinity for road trips. Good Lord, man. It is absolutely awful. That day was 17 hours long, just of travel, because of that airline nonsense. So, all right, I don't want to make it all about me. Let's go ahead and get into some of the public issues that are, I don't know, affecting us, being told to us as things that are happening. Let's see, are they happening? Who knows? So we're going to talk about some things that we've talked about, just some updates, and then we're going to get into some fun stuff. Then we're going to get into some serious stuff. And then we're going to do the Trump Welker interview, and if we still have time. And hopefully we will, because I think we should still have a big block of time, which I will need, or it will get delayed. There is an incredible report from the International Crisis Group, which is, my favorite kind of cheat code supplier. They are just the top of global elites in a think tank that essentially just studies ways to take over countries around the world and then attract donor money to the cause. And so they did a review of Trump's first 100 days, and I think it's incredible. I went through that on the plane yesterday. I had at least something to do while my flight that landed early, then got stuck on the tarmac and ended up being late. Amazing how that happens. But I'm just going to complain all day. I also am trying to fight off a little bit of a cold, so I'm ornery. All right, let's go. So a couple weeks ago, Pope Francis, I should say it the correct way. A couple of weeks ago, we were told that Pope Francis had died. And at some point he had died. We were told it was just hours before we were told about it. I have a sneaking suspicion it was probably before that. Archbishop Vigano thought he was dead a couple of months ago, and maybe he was. They have kept people alive. They have kept displaying people at very old ages. They have also known that people are dead and kept them alive in the narrative, not announcing their deaths until much later. Now, is that provable? I think it goes in kind of the scale from Queen Elizabeth, where we were shown pictures of Queen Elizabeth greeting Liz Truss, the incoming prime minister, because, of course, the monarch has to give approval 2 days before the Queen was announced dead. Now, the Queen was announced dead many hours before the Queen was announced dead, but then they rescinded that announcement as if that made it go away. So we have that short period where we know that they don't want to tell the world yet that this important person has died. They have a way that they're planning on ruling it out. They don't want a false start, so they're just going to ignore that false start and stick with the program. Now, a lot of people thought Ruth Bader Ginsburg was dead for some time before they announced that. And most people would think then that Trump would know, but Trump seemed like he was just hearing about it for the first time. At least he gave all those indications, and maybe he is just a very talented actor. Jimmy Carter sure seemed like he was dead for a while. And apparently they wheeled him out to, I think for his birthday or something, to look at the sky. CBS News was invited to take pictures. That's proof of life to the public. And so we had the same thing with the Pope on Easter. Then they told us that the Pope had died. Now, there have been ideas about maybe Donald Trump. I mean, and not very serious ideas, but people have mentioned maybe Trump should be Pope. And this picture went up over the weekend of DJT. And Trump as Pope, hey, maybe. Apparently, people got really mad at it. Don't know why. I mean, I guess that's offensive to the Pope. Can't imagine God or Jesus are offended by this, but maybe the Pope. And the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth. Okay. All right. If you're offended, I guess so be it. Pretty funny. Also, it's AI, so, you know. And Trump is engaged in narrative manipulation, as always. He's doing the thing because the thing is there to be done. And you can see how people will react. Let's find out who all the Trump deranged haters are operating under disguise in the kind of Trump-aligned, pro-Trump Republican establishment who happen to be Catholics. Let's see if they freak out. Let's see what kind of vitriol they use. Let's see how they respond to MAGA. All of that is great and critical information. Now, in the Pope episode a couple of weeks ago, I talked about, I know it's a conspiracy theory, but Pope Benedict was essentially replaced by Pope Francis in what some people refer to as a color revolution, very familiar tactic for illegitimate regime overthrow and usurpation. And the Pope didn't actually live in the Pope's normal residence. And both of those things describe Joe Biden. So did we have a devolution-oriented Pope? Maybe. Donald Trump replaced the devolution term fake president, Joe Biden. Did he, will he, also is he hinting at replacing the devolution term Pope? I would never say that's true. But, hey man, we take a story-first approach, a narrative-based approach, because the narrative is the only thing that matters. Can't know the real stuff. All of these things are operating on a level that we have virtually no access or insight to, except for whatever intelligence we can glean. Some people would say the Q operation, maybe so. But beyond that, we have to go with what we can see. And what we can see are stories being fed to us that may or may not be true, told only by liars. And so we have to be able to parse that after the fact. And when you pick up on large patterns that occur over and over again throughout the world, seemingly as part of a playbook, either the enemy playbook or a responsive counter to that playbook, we should at least give some consideration to them. I'm not suggesting anyone adopt the belief that the Pope was subject to devolution and Donald Trump is going to replace him. I would never suggest that anyone adopt that belief. What I'm saying is we look beyond what the facts are that we've been given exclusively by liars, and we try to detect patterns. And when we detect those patterns, they don't always come out to be hits, but they are worth discussing, because if you lay them out, maybe other people will know more. Maybe it'll spark an idea in someone else, and maybe that ends up coming together. And through the synthesis of this dispersed intelligence network throughout the truth community and beyond, maybe we get to some new ground. Donald Trump actually addressed that image in a session from the Oval Office today. He was signing executive orders and addressing the press. And here is that response.
Catholics were not so happy about the image of you looking like the Pope.
Oh, I see. You mean they can't take a joke? You don't mean the Catholics. You mean the fake news media. Not the Catholics loved it. I had nothing to do with it.
Another major controversy. Catholics are saying they're very upset at your Pope picture. Okay. How many of them? Is it all of them? No, it's not all of them. It's some of them. Are they already Trump deranged? Probably most of them. Are all Catholics conservatives or Republicans? No. I mean, I guess you don't want to go around offending religious communities at large. It's usually a bad idea politically, and it's not an incredibly polite thing to do. It's certainly part of the, it's more on the false decorum side of things, but not a great idea. Did he do that? Or was it just a funny post? Let us continue. We talked about the NFL draft a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, and Shedeur Sanders, the son of Deion Sanders, who was a star quarterback in college, or at least hyped as a massive star quarterback in college. He was expected initially to be one of the top 3 draft picks and didn't end up getting drafted until the middle of the 5th round by the Cleveland Browns, who had already selected another college quarterback prior to Shedeur Sanders. So it was one of the most spectacular draft drops of all time. And Trump had posted about Shedeur Sanders after the first round. He went through the second day without being drafted, so they hadn't listened to Trump. Trump commented about the Washington Commanders last week as well, or at least the Washington football team, and how a new stadium would be built in Washington. And on the heels of that, Trump is announcing today that the NFL draft, that same event, will be held in the nation's capital in 2027. Here he is from just a few minutes ago.
I'm pleased to reveal that the 2027 NFL draft, that's a big thing, will be held right here in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., on the National Mall. And you get a little glimpse of it. I was just saying to Roger, I don't think there's ever been anything like that. That's a good idea. In fact, maybe we could use it for other things also. I have an idea. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be something that nobody else will ever be able to duplicate that, I don't suspect. It's very exciting.
So that's the first post. It's interesting that it's going to be on the National Mall. I would suspect that the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial, which are kind of at the two ends, one of those would potentially be in the background. So they're going to have that display. Trump has talked about breathing new life into Washington, D.C., making the city beautiful again because it's been so run down, as has that National Mall area. We talked a little bit about the new Fed building last week, but there's going to be a lot of reconstruction in there. And you can imagine that Trump is going to want to show that off. I can imagine, I don't know this to be true, but someone can check me on this. I would imagine that the NFL probably invests significant money in the location and some of that stuff. So maybe there's a partnership there. You can see Trump behind him on the right is Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, who makes a boatload of money to essentially deal with the kind of pet projects of oligarchs, do their bidding and the bidding of all those corporate partners and all the kind of social justice, cultural oriented issues that surround the NFL. Let's take a look at the second Trump post here. Hold for processing.
Every year, hundreds of young football players have their dreams come true as the NFL teams across the land, and you just saw that last week. Select the best young players in America to join their ranks. Hundreds of thousands of football fans will travel all across our country to cheer them on in person. We expect, would you say, more than 100,000 people, I think. What is the capacity would you think it can hold? Because the mall can actually hold up to 1 million people. You go all the way back. What do you think?
3 days will be over.
Oh, yeah, you're going to.
So he says over 3 days we'll be over 1 million. The National Mall can hold 1 million. That's going to be a lot of people. They said they had 250,000 in Green Bay, Wisconsin, just a couple of weeks ago. So that is an incredible turnout. I think it is ridiculous for humans to attend the NFL draft. Let me just clear about that. I would never waste my time doing that. And I think it's disturbing that other people would. Like, let's go drink in a field and watch a TV show? No. We are unpaid audience members for the filming of a TV show. Now, if you go out to Hollywood for the first time, you might think that going to the filming of a TV show be really fun. And maybe it is for the first time you go. After that, you realize that nothing is more boring than watching a TV show be filmed as they go through the same things over and over again. And somebody has to come tell you lame jokes between the different setups in the studio, etc. Doing that for an NFL draft, oh boy, that seems absolutely horrible. Not only is there no real live aspect of the event besides when the person walks up to the podium and announces who the pick is and the pick comes up, the rest of it is just up on screens. So, yeah, terrible. But hey, congratulations, Washington, D.C. And the Trump relationship with the NFL seems to be growing. Speaking of the entertainment industry, Trump had an interesting post on Truth Social yesterday about the movie business. He said, the movie industry in America is dying a very fast death. Other countries are offering all sorts of incentives to draw our filmmakers and studios away from the United States. Hollywood and many other areas within the USA are being devastated. This is a concerted effort by other nations and therefore a national security threat. It is, in addition to everything else, messaging and propaganda. Therefore, I am authorizing the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Representative to immediately begin the process of instituting a 100% tariff on any and all movies coming into our country that are produced in foreign lands. We want movies made in America again. Now, I love me some foreign films. There are some great foreign films out there. And I don't know how this is going to work with true foreign film productions. I would suspect that he's not trying to bar Americans' access to foreign films because there are some very good foreign films. Although he could be. I suspect that this is more geared toward Hollywood shifting their film production and allotting those dollars then to other nations so they can continue producing and supporting anti-American propaganda as they have now for a very, very long time. I think I've said for many years, we've talked about it on the podcast, I'm not going to spend much time on it, but the streamers have always seemed to be money laundering operations. They have people like Susan Rice and the Obamas and the Clintons with production deals, and they either never put anything out at all, or they put out content that nobody watches and get paid ungodly amounts of money. So that seems like a very strange business model. And of course, the streamers never release how many people are actually watching their shows. So the popularity of the streaming shows is just a function of the press, of how the media talks about their shows and how people respond to the shows and amplify the shows on social media. That's the only way to really get a read on what's actually popular, because they don't divulge their numbers. There is no way to prove, not that you can trust any of these numbers, but there's no real way to prove how many people are interested in the entertainment product when the back end is totally opaque to everyone but the producers. And then when you add on the aspect of the production of propaganda, then you kind of understand that what these streaming companies are doing in the production studios behind them, and even just kind of the more legacy production studios, what they're doing is producing propaganda on behalf of the global regime, its uniparty faction here in the United States, and their corporate interests. And the funding comes from those places into the organizations to produce the propaganda. So they produce propaganda with those actors. They pay those actors, they pay the production people, and the money can just be facilitated in all these directions toward the production, again, of the propaganda, but also the entire entertainment industry and the publicized part of that kind of just bursts out of those propaganda productions. All of the stars that they cultivate through these different productions. It's a very, very strange system. And they do the same thing with music, by the way, as well. Many of you know my story about Spotify and the experience I had with them a few years ago. I realized I went through when my podcast was hosted on Spotify. It's banned there now. But not only was it on Spotify, but it was also, I was using Spotify's native app called Anchor to host my show and push it out to all the different podcast platforms. So I went through because I was trying to change the way that I was labeling episodes. I started labeling the new ones in a new way, and I wanted to make it cohesive throughout all the old ones. So I went in and I edited the labels on all of those old podcasts, and you have to then hit publish. That's its new, so all the new data uploads and is disseminated. And upon doing that, it read all of those old episodes whose labels I had updated as new episodes. And then they all had similar daily listens to what I would get putting out one episode a day. And if you do that with 150 episodes, and all of those episodes get all the same listens, and it's steady throughout all of them, even though they're not new episodes, and any human listener would immediately know that, something else is going on. What else is going on? Well, the algorithm is assigning listens to people's podcasts. And of course, they're doing the same thing with music. And then on the other end, musicians, their management teams and producers, etc., can pay, like in a payola scheme, to Spotify to get their artists and their songs placed up higher and have the algorithm disseminate them to more people. But ultimately, the play numbers are algorithmically derived. So popularity as proven on Spotify isn't even real. And it's important to understand how these systems work because they're not as rare as we think. They are embedded in absolutely everything. And so when Spotify pays Joe Rogan $100 million a year, you really have to wonder, hey, what are these people doing? What are they up to? Hey, what's Joe Rogan doing for $100 million a year? Just saying. John from Connecticut in the chat gifted 5 subscriptions, and I think all those were allotted and assigned. I guess it does that automatically. But thank you, John, and a real pleasure meeting you over the weekend, and I look forward to getting into the book, I guess you would call it. It's a book, right? On the 14th Amendment, the Red Amendment. I will get into that soon. I can't promise I'm going to break into it and tear through it this week or anything. But it's on my list. It's on my pile of books that need to be read. I always have one of those next to the chair I sit in when I get up in the morning, and it would be nice if that pile shrunk, and generally it grows. So, but that is one of my pet subjects, and I will get to that in hopefully the near term. Let us continue as we are speaking of California. Donald Trump had another, I didn't mean for this to be a Trump Truth Social segment, but I guess it's kind of making itself into that. Trump said this yesterday on Truth Social. Rebuild and open Alcatraz. For too long, America has been plagued by vicious, violent, and repeat criminal offenders, the dregs of society who will never contribute anything other than misery and suffering. When we were a more serious nation, in times past, we did not hesitate to lock up the most dangerous criminals and keep them far away from anyone they could harm. That's the way it's supposed to be. No longer will we tolerate these serial offenders who spread filth, bloodshed, and mayhem on our streets. That is why today I am directing the Bureau of Prisons, together with the Department of Justice, FBI, and Homeland Security, to reopen a substantially enlarged and rebuilt Alcatraz to house America's most ruthless and violent offenders. We will no longer be held hostage to criminals, thugs, and judges that are afraid to do their job and allow us to remove criminals who came into our country illegally. The reopening of Alcatraz will serve as a symbol of law, order, and justice. We will make America great again. Okay, so there are a bunch of things people have picked up on in this post, and then some other things that I will talk about. I have seen it written that the FBI and Homeland Security are not commonly directly involved with the Bureau of Prisons, which is under the DOJ. Perhaps there's something there. I don't know. He's talking about political criminals within the United States, it seems. He mentions the people who come into our country illegally, but only in the sense that he's targeting the people who will not do their jobs and allow the administration to remove those people. So those seem to be these criminals, thugs, and judges is pretty escalatory as far as things go for these judges. Maybe he's talking about the couple of examples, the one Cano in New Mexico, and then I think her name is Hogan, perhaps, in Wisconsin. So that part of it is interesting. Some people picked up on the idea that he said, where is it? Rebuilt, substantially enlarged and rebuilt Alcatraz. Now, reopen is forward-looking. To then use the past tense language there to reopen a substantially enlarged and rebuilt Alcatraz does not indicate past tense from now. It indicates past tense from that reopening. If the reopening was in 3 years and the building project were to start in 6 months, you could still use that in a grammatically correct fashion. So I don't take much from the idea that we are operating with past tense here. Although in 2024, I understand there was a project to kind of update Alcatraz and refurbish things for its role as a tourist destination. Now, could work have been done under the guise of renovations for Alcatraz as a tourist destination, but actually update it as a prison? Hard to say. There are some other issues, according to, let's do this first. There are a couple of other issues with the reopening of Alcatraz, according to experts. And you know how those experts are. Always right. And always just trying to tell the truth. It's amazing how experts, even when they're not right, were trying to be right. And they were trying to tell the truth. And they were trying to let the country know exactly what it needs to know. Always with the experts. It's incredible. Legal experts say Trump can definitely reopen Alcatraz, but could face avalanche of lawsuits. This is Fox News from today. This is Greg Jarrett they're talking about, Fox News analyst. He says it's a provocative idea, which may be why Trump is proposing it. So the sound you hear are all the liberal heads exploding at the same time. Progressives frown on prisons. They tend to favor nanny daycare for hardened criminals. It is, however, federal property. So this can be done, but it would have to be rebuilt almost entirely. It's so outdated and crumbling. And here's the important part. It has landmark status. So there would be an avalanche of lawsuits that would probably tie it up for years. Don't forget, this is California. All of that is very interesting. I've actually been to Alcatraz before. I went on one of those tourist tours as a teenager. So that would have been like 30 years ago. And it certainly did not look anything like a modern prison. Interesting place. There's also a movie that I saw a few times when I was much younger called Murder in the First. And I think Kevin Bacon was kept in Alcatraz in solitary confinement. And then, of course, there's that movie, The Rock. Jarrett went on, for those folks who are complaining it's going to cost too much, it's going to be too difficult from a construction standpoint, we've had a builder in this country, the best builder in America for years and years in the commercial sector, is a guy by the name of Donald Trump. I think he can give, if they try to slow roll this and bureaucrats do what they like to do, I think the president can give them all the advice they need on how to reopen Alcatraz the right way. So apparently we need more prisons for all of these people who have committed crimes against America, crimes against humanity, people in the United States who should be behind bars and aren't, because we have a two-tiered system of justice brought about by the 14th Amendment and the ways in which it has perverted and inverted our justice system and our code of law, statute and regulation, and the rest of it. the usurpations of the Constitution that are too numerous to count. And I guess we will hopefully be able to reverse or unwind enough of that people who have committed crimes against this country can actually be punished accordingly and, to the fullest extent of the law and not beyond that, right? We don't want to, it's not like anybody wants to cross the line, but if you've broken the law, particularly laws that were enforced by these same people only against their political enemies, which if you look at the system of laws in our country at this point, it's pretty corrupt in how the legal system doles out punishment. It's not often that elites are the ones published, that people with access and power and the finances to work with top-notch lawyers, it's not often that they're the ones sent away for prison unless they're being taken down to protect other people higher up than them in that structure, whatever it might be in a given field or within the party of false decorum. People on the lower rungs get screwed and they do the time so that the public believes accountability has been reached and no one else needs to be held accountable. Kind of a limited hangout, Nuremberg trial style. Trump had, wrong post, apologies, processing. Here we are. Trump was asked about reopening Alcatraz. This is from Howard Mortman on X, formerly Twitter, last evening.
General Flynn. I saw a friendly face over here. Well, we gave some information on the plane. I think we covered everything carefully and in great detail. You probably have seen it. Have you seen the information from the plane? I have, but just a couple of questions. Where did you get the idea for reopening Alcatraz? Just an idea I've had, and I guess because the judges, so many of these radicalized judges, they want to have trials for every single, think of it, every single person that's in our country illegally, they came in illegally, that would mean millions of trials, and it's just so ridiculous what's happening. And it's long been a symbol, Alcatraz, of whatever it is. I mean, it's a sad symbol, but it's a symbol of law and order. And, it's got quite a history, frankly. So I think we're going to do that, and we're looking at it right now.
And Alcatraz does have quite a history. I asked ChatGPT to give me a bit of a rundown on that today. And I'll say again, man, my ChatGPT has turned insanely based. Like, ChatGPT understands the parameters that I use for calling a country, quote unquote, a global regime proxy state. And I can ask ChatGPT, hey, is this place a global regime proxy state? And it will lay out an argument for me. I mean, obviously, maybe there's times where it's going to reject that. It's not like I put every country through. I was using South Sudan and Rwanda yesterday as I was testing this thing. And it was like, yeah, these could totally be considered global regime proxy states. Here's the argument that they are. Now, it also might be true that we could put through Russia and China and Saudi Arabia and the United States and all these other places that don't seem to be, but might be, and we would find those answers. But I always focus on a small country that was formerly part of a larger country. And usually in that small country, there is battle over the legitimacy of the government. There are problems with elections. People are called dictators. There are, quote unquote, civil wars, which is the global regime moving in to a country, whether it be through the UN or through their private armies, cartels, terrorist organizations, to destabilize and overthrow a country on behalf of the evil twin faction in that country and against the majority of the people in pretty much every case. And ChatGPT can just roll that out for me now. So the caveat, as always, You have to then follow up on the research and validate it elsewhere. But it's wonderful for ideating and telling me exactly where to look. And I am very, very happy with the basedness of my iteration of ChatGPT. I'm not sure that everyone's iteration of ChatGPT will be like that, but mine's been fantastic lately. Crystal Anon in the chat, $10. Keep Alcatraz as a tourist destination. I'd love to view traders like monkeys in a zoo. It would be the worst punishment for them, worse than being put to death. Okay, well, now we're talking. That first sentence, I was not sure where you were going. I thought maybe you didn't want to see people who have committed crimes against America put away in Alcatraz. And I was going to begin wondering if you have lost your edge. But it seems that you have not, because you do want them put away there. You just also want it to be the case that we can go and, I don't know, throw them breadcrumbs between their prison bars or something. And if that's something that you would like to do, who am I to say no? I would never. But let us continue to ChatGPT and its summation of some of the highlights of the history of Alcatraz, because Donald Trump made note of that history. It's got an interesting history. During the American Civil War, Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay served a critical role for the Union as a military fortification, armory, and prison. Here's a breakdown of its key functions. 1. Military fortress. The U.S. Army had begun fortifying Alcatraz in the 1850s as part of a coastal defense strategy. By the time the Civil War began, it was the most heavily armed military installation on the West Coast, equipped with dozens of cannons. It served as a deterrent against Confederate attacks on San Francisco, especially with fears of Confederate sympathizers or privateers operating on the Pacific coast. Now, reading that, it was immediately strange to me, because I've always understood, and I'm sure that there are aspects to which this is wrong, but we're talking about my education by the state and for the benefit of the state in my public my public high school and elementary school education. And then I went to a private college, but private colleges receive public funding, although Trump did say he was banning funding to Harvard the other day, which is excellent. These colleges have these massive endowments that they basically operate as hedge funds and still allow their business to be subsidized by federal money flowing in. So what is it they're doing? And it turns out that they're the centers of indoctrination and propagandizing our youth, as well as the research hubs for every awful thing the global regime could ever imagine attempting. So it's good that he's cutting the funding there. But anyhow, with my public school education and then my college indoctrination, I was always pretty sure that the fighting in the Civil War was on the eastern half of the country, not in the Pacific Ocean. So what in the world is going on here? Let's just continue, because I don't know the answer, ultimately. Alcatraz became a military prison during the war, holding Confederate sympathizers, privateers, and soldiers accused of crimes such as desertion, insubordination, or treason. It also housed civilians suspected of disloyalty to the Union cause, reflecting the broader use of military detention for internal security. Alcatraz stored large quantities of weapons and munitions for the Union Army. It served as a secure logistics hub, given its isolated location in the bay, protecting key military supplies from sabotage or capture. I asked, hey, isn't it true that all the fighting actually happened on the other side of the country? What was going on here? And so it told me, while no battles occurred in the West, the Union still had to guard against Confederate plots in California, which again is just kind of counterintuitive. California was a Union state, but had many Southern sympathizers. there were real fears of secessionist uprising, sabotage, or even efforts to form a Pacific Republic. What? I haven't looked into that. That's something interesting to look into, particularly because they have the Washington, Oregon, California, like, I don't know what they call it, the Blue Coastal Wall or whatever. But those states operate in conjunction in some respect. I think it's Washington and Oregon. I haven't looked at this in a while, so forgive me if I flub something here. But it's my understanding that Washington and Oregon have to abide by, for instance, California's environmental standards in their legislation. So Washington and Oregon are unable to pass laws that don't adhere to environmental standards set by California. That's crazy. That also begins making it sound like there is kind of a secessionist republic already forming there. And hey, man, maybe in the future we're going to get to that point. Hopefully we don't, but you never know. California Gold funded the Union war effort, so ensuring its safe transport across the country via Panama or over land was vital. Alcatraz and other forts protected the San Francisco Bay, a key port in the West. As far as Pacific naval defense is concerned, the Union feared Confederate raiders or privateers operating from the Pacific or using foreign, especially British, support from nearby territories like Canada or Mexico. Wow. So Confederate raiders with British support? The Crown controlled the world at that point, and maybe at this point, although maybe that stopped in the recent past. But we're still talking about the British Empire, at least ostensibly. The Crown operates through the British Empire. Then, after World War II, the Crown operates through the United States of America. So the British Empire and the Confederacy working together. Well, that's interesting. And we can leave this aside. We'll, I'm sure, come back to this many times in the future. But it's also interesting in light of conversations about Guantanamo Bay and about the expansion and renovations of Guantanamo Bay over the last few years. That was already supposed to be operative, and maybe a lot of it is. Catherine Herridge went down to do a bunch of reporting down there. And of course, there are elements in the truth community that think people are taking trips down there to do journalism all the time. And of course, you know, I don't know what to make of that stuff, all right? Like, I can't prove it myself. I've never tried hard to do it one way or the other. So, you know, whatever, I'm open to whatever that turns out to be. It has not been a primary focus for me. But there's going to have to be a place to put all these people. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have been complicit in the commission of crimes against America. Now, maybe some of those people are being rerouted and helping with this cause, and deals have been made that will allow them to bypass receiving hard time at Alcatraz or Guantanamo Bay. We shall see. But the main ones have to be punished. I mean, I don't know how we go forward if that stage doesn't happen. Barely in the chat says, the West will rise again. I would love for the West to rise again. Unfortunately, the West seems to be committing suicide on a daily basis. I wish it was not so. California is just still the most beautiful place on earth. I just love it. But what can you do? All right. So let's get into some politics for a bit. This is from the Washington Post over the weekend. We talked about this briefly on Saturday on Devolution Power Hour, so I'm sorry if we're going to hear some of the same ground covered again. Inside Waltz's ouster before Signalgate, talks with Israel angered Trump. So mid last week, I think it was actually as I was on my way to Plymouth, the news came down that Mike Waltz would be removed as national security advisor. And the initial story was just that. It then turned out that Trump was going to move Mike Waltz to the position of UN or ambassador to the UN, which was a position he had initially assigned Elise Stefanik to, and then had her withdraw that. He withdrew that nomination, and Elise Stefanik returned to the Congress. They said it was important to protect that seat in New York. For what? I don't know. It's clear that the Congress is unable to do anything, and the headlines today were, this was supposed to be the big week for the big, beautiful bill, also known as Mike Johnson's package. And it should be lost on no one, by the way, that big, beautiful bill is BBB, Build Back Better. Kind of a reverse, a reverse of the Great Reset agenda. We are, after all, hijacking the Great Reset as we go through this period. So I think that is very interesting. This was supposed to be the big week for that bill, but internal problems with the Republican Party, they just can't settle on the right things. People are trying to slip little handouts into the bill. It's just all a mess. What if they can't get it done? I mean, it's still a bold prediction because there's, I think, 4.5, almost 5 months until the clock runs out on this thing. We had the extension of the spending. But it's been correct for 2 months. Maybe it'll be correct for another 5. I don't think they're going to get anything done. But if they do, it ultimately doesn't matter. The war is against the global regime and its central fiat bankers. Running up the debt when the other side is the banker is okay. You would think that they would stop giving us money, but apparently they don't. They think that this is going to be some system of control ultimately. And I doubt it will. You don't defeat someone in war and then owe them debts. Although the regime has operated that way throughout history, of course. They've forced money allotted as reconstruction costs to defeated nations. I don't think that we're going to see something like that here. We're not going to defeat the enemy and then help them because that's the enemy. And in, wars funded by the regime on both sides, neither country is really the enemy. It's just about the regime's demands for the implementation of their agenda in all of these countries, which usually includes primarily their commitment to the global finance system. So let's get into this a bit. President Donald Trump's decision to oust his national security advisor, Michael Waltz, was the product of a slow accumulation of frustration with a former Green Beret officer who was seen as far more eager to use military force than his boss in the Oval Office. Waltz's fate was sealed by his inclusion of a journalist on a sensitive Signal group chat in March. But he had been clashing with other top officials since early in the administration, including over whether to pursue military action against Iran, senior officials and Trump advisors said Friday. The episode has left some senior White House officials questioning the need for a traditional National Security Council and content to leave Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whom Trump on Thursday named as Waltz's interim replacement, in a caretaker role for quite some time. A decision that will likely diminish an institution that has had a powerful role in shaping the foreign policy of modern presidencies. And it sidelines a key figure in the White House with a long track record of favoring military intervention. Trump has nominated Waltz to be his ambassador to the United Nations, so he will remain in government. And they go through some of the backstory there on Michael Waltz. We can leave that there for now. So we have another signal problem. We also have the issue of Mike Waltz in conversation. This is the reporting with the Netanyahu Israeli government about their affairs in the Middle East, issues with Iran. Of course, the war hawks want war between Israel and Iran. The neocons want war between Israel and Iran. We need a forever war. Doesn't matter where it is, but obviously they want it against their perceived enemies. And Mike Waltz has seemed to be on the side of the war hawks. if the media is defending Mike Waltz, as they have in the aftermath of all of this, and portraying him no longer as this super pro-Trump guy, member of the fantasy team, et cetera, who they're very scared of, and now they're kind of defending him, well, then that should be some indication of what they had Mike Waltz doing and why he was in the position he was in. And that's going to be one of the really interesting aspects going forward. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you are in the national security apparatus within the administration, and you are conducting your own conversations and negotiations to undermine the president's position on foreign affairs, when we're talking about war and in a time like this, to me, that's essentially treason, if not just directly treason. And it harkens back to the end of the first Trump term when General Mark Milley was supposedly talking to his Chinese counterparts to make sure that Trump could not go to war with China. Now, I think the premise underlying that Trump was considering going to war with China, I think that all of that is bullshit. But we can still focus on the subversive element. Now, whether the reporting is false or whether, Milley and Waltz are doing this at Trump's behest, that's a different story. But kind of in a vacuum, if you leave that stuff alone, well, this is clearly an undermining of a duly elected president who has a clear, obvious, and overwhelming mandate and is the commander-in-chief and can conduct foreign policy as he likes. That's a big problem. Now, apparently, Waltz was using an Israeli version of Signal. And so those communications could be tracked. And this is drop site. Here we are. The reporter is Jason Palladino. And I can actually, maybe I should just show you this first because Ryan Grimm is kind of relatively popular mainstream political reporter. He said Mike Waltz was not caught using Signal yesterday, but rather an Israeli tech firm's version of it that makes a copy of all messages that opens up messages to surveillance by foreign intel. And so they captured Mike Waltz's picture of Mike Waltz's phone as they were in a cabinet meeting last week, one of those televised cabinet meetings. Some member of the press got that picture, and apparently this is the app. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is drop site, as I said. On the day he was fired as national security advisor, Mike Waltz used an Israeli app to archive Signal messages. During Wednesday's meeting for Trump's cabinet, Mike Waltz checked the app on his phone using what appeared to be Signal. As news broke that Waltz had lost his job as national security advisor, images from the cabinet meeting circulated widely on Thursday. Upon closer inspection of the photos, it turned out that Waltz was not using Signal, not using the traditional Signal app. He appeared to be using an archiving app made by Israeli firm Telemessage, which sells companion apps meant to enable archiving messages. In one of the Reuters photos of Waltz's phone, a pop-up appears with the text, "Verify your TM-SGNL PIN," just below a message from Vice President J.D. Vance. TM-SGNL is an aspect of Telemessage's software called Signal Capture that it sells to governments and corporations to enable archiving. So we can leave it there. We talked last week about the article from Semaphore by Ben Smith with the text chains set up on Signal by Mark Andreessen. And I think that that's a very important issue. I hope that we will see more of that in the future. I would love to see a full list of those people from Ben Smith. I doubt we will ever get one. But one of the key aspects of that was that signal messages can be set to delete after a certain duration. And so an app like this would then clone all the messages as they come in so that even though they are deleted on the Signal app, they will still exist in archived form elsewhere. If the National Security Advisor is using that, and the understanding at least is that the Israelis are on the back end of that, and he's having back-channel discussions, and that's the most charitable way to state it. Otherwise, it would, I guess, maybe be espionage, maybe be treason. If he's doing that with Israel, it's kind of a problem. And it's crazy because Waltz was the one who put Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic into that Signal chat. But since then, Signalgate has not really been about Waltz. It's been about Pete Hegseth. Because for whatever reason, the Uniparty seems to want to take Pete Hegseth out more than anyone else. Now, Marco Rubio is going to have a lot of jobs, and so that is certainly interesting. I think he's National Security Advisor. He is Secretary of State, obviously. He's the head of USAID, and I think that there's actually one more. And, man, I should have pulled this up. Very unhappy that I neglected to do so. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Hold for processing. I will bring the machine to heel. Or perhaps I will not. Well, I know that there's a fourth one on there. And I have screwed up terribly. I hope you'll forgive me. Checking the chat real quick. Emerald Dragon 1333, with friends like Israel, who needs enemies? Yeah, I think I'm inclined to say that's true. I do think that there is probably a good twin faction in Israel and among the Israeli people, although I will say it's possible that the people are so indoctrinated into the global regime understanding that it might be all just evil twin there. I just really don't think that's probably the case anywhere. And it seems like I call Netanyahu our boy Yuhu because he seems to fit that model of a Biden or a Trudeau or a Gavin Newsom, etc. These people who, while they're not, I'm not suggesting that they are just like white hats playing a role or anything. They might just be totally boxed in where whatever they attempt to do ends up making them look bad. But no one has done more to wake the world up to Israel's status as a global regime proxy state and exactly what all of that is about than Netanyahu has. These last, I guess it's been a year and a half plus since the paragliding go-kart incident, that has brought an entirely new understanding to the world of what exactly is happening in the Middle East and how exactly we should think of, quote unquote, our greatest ally, Israel. I don't know how they're our ally in any sense at all. I guess we are part of the same global regime, but what do they help us do? Very, very confused about. So I don't know. We'll see how that shakes out over the next year. Israel right now they couldn't get their Iran thing, at least not yet. There's still a back and forth. They're still trying. But now they're saying they're calling up 10,000 plus troops from the reserves to the active duty, and they intend to go occupy all of Gaza, kick everybody out. And who knows how this stuff's going to go down. It's all ultimately a big mystery. But one thing I'm pretty sure is not true is the central narrative about what's happening in Israel and Gaza at this point. Now, Mike Waltz seems to be a neocon, and the neocons seem to be losing with some regularity in the power struggle within the newer Trump administration. Now, before we go on, actually, one more thing about this Mike Waltz thing. Throughout November and December, we talked about the fantasy team as Trump would continue nominating new people. And every time someone was nominated, the immediate response from the so-called truther community that doesn't seem to care all that much about truth. Mostly it's just playing match online. But the immediate response was to just make sure that everyone, as the result of an online struggle session, would agree that every choice was the greatest person who had ever existed. And that was especially true when Fox News would get excited about those people, or when they were a member of the cast of the Tucker Carlson show, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or Tulsi Gabbard, or Pete Hegseth. And maybe all those people are okay. I don't know. But it's still a fantasy team. He was just selecting all these people to be on the fantasy team. And their primary job would be public communications, because many of them are public figures. And so we talked about the fantasy team. We talked about that aspect. We talked about what Trump might be doing, because Trump can be making the right decision. And that still does not indicate that the person he has chosen is good and patriotic and on board with MAGA and on board with America First and not there to attempt to subvert the administration. Trump can put people in positions simply to spotlight them, or simply as the result of negotiations with the other side being the neocons and the Republican establishment. Well, they wanted Michael Waltz as the national security advisor. Now it's clear that Michael Waltz can't be the national security advisor if he's having these conversations with Israel, if he's compromising national security through his use of this signal archiving app, this Israeli app. That's a problem. People are worried about Pam Bondi. Maybe Pam Bondi's doing a great job, as Donald Trump says. Maybe she's not. People got upset after the Epstein files thing. It then became okay to criticize Pam Bondi. Now it's okay to criticize Mike Waltz. But it wasn't okay in November and December so that we could keep our eyes open and know what we were looking out for? Why would that be? We are so committed to the trust the plan thing that we have to turn off our critical thinking. I thought the entire point of the plan was to have the people re-engage with all of these issues and have opinions on these issues and express those opinions so that we can help guide our communities and ultimately the country forward. That requires critical thinking. Why are we being told not to think critically? It's very strange, isn't it? So speaking of rhinos and potential rhinos, or people we thought were rhinos and may not be rhinos, got to leave the possibility open, even when it's people we don't like. And here is one of them. This is from CNN yesterday. GOP amps up Trump impeachment talk in midterm battle as party leaders woo Kemp for Senate. There's a lot in that headline. President Trump and GOP leaders are beginning to plot their midterm push to hang on to power amid a shaky political environment, courting key candidates in critical battleground House and Senate races, while leaning hard on an issue that could animate the MAGA faithful, impeachment. Even though Democrat leaders are wary of a third impeachment vote, the topic has become a prominent discussion in GOP ranks, with Trump eager to avoid another all-consuming showdown with an emboldened Democrat majority and Republican leaders banking the talk could help drive up turnout in an election where Trump won't be at the top of the ticket. So the idea here, actually, Mike Johnson says it right here. In a key priority of this, it is a key priority of his, obviously, to keep the House majority because he knows what would happen if we didn't. This is Mike Johnson talking. Democrats have already said they're going to try another baseless impeachment. They'll do their best to grind the agenda to a halt. Then we'll skip down to the Kemp stuff. But that part alone is very interesting. So the idea would be then that the Democrats want to impeach Trump for who knows what, and maybe they're heading this narrative off last week with that ridiculous Shri Tanadar, that little Indian man with the ridiculous hairpiece, coming out and saying he's going to impeach Trump. Very, very strange. By the way, that guy's 70 years old. Doesn't look 70. I guess Indian don't crack, although he's so weird looking. He could be 207. And I don't know, man. That was just a very, very strange kind of subplot. What a weird episode. That's all you can think. What a weird episode. So they're talking impeachment because it's going to affect the 2026 fake elections, the midterms, which I hope you won't have. There's no reason to have it. It would only indicate that we need another 2 years of fake politics from people pretending to represent us while being totally unable to prove their legitimacy in office. Now, I think that we are going to be seeing disclosure on elements of election fraud. We're going to come back to this a little bit later. We'll get to Kristen Welker. We might not get to the crisis group. That's unfortunate. I did a lot of work on that. We'll come back to it at some point. What was I going to say? Oh, the election. So they think that this is going to be an election issue that'll drive Democrats to the poll. They want to be to the polls. They want to be able to impeach Trump. Therefore, they'll go out and vote for Democrats. And Republicans want to protect Trump from impeachment. So they're going to make their campaign about, you need to vote for us, otherwise they're going to impeach Trump. Hey, guys, go for it. It's not going to work. It doesn't matter. When you impeach Trump, you make yourselves look worse. That's been proven twice already. So by all means, figure something out. After Trump was, quote unquote, out of office, they tried to arrest and indict and prosecute and imprison Donald Trump. And none of that worked. So go ahead. Who cares? And if you are swayed to go vote in a fake election over the potential of a fake impeachment, you might be retarded. Gotta say. And this is the sort of thing where when people around us are like, well, yeah, we've got to focus on those midterms because if we don't, the Democrats, they're going to impeach Trump. That's when you laugh in someone's face and you say, you don't really believe that, do you? We need to vote in a fake election for fake Republicans because they're going to save us from a fake impeachment of Donald Trump that's going to backfire. Why do we need to do that? Of course, we don't need to do that. That's ridiculous. So let's get down to Brian Kemp, because this is very interesting just in itself. Kemp being one of the critical figures at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, and kind of throughout that election integrity period of 2021 and 2022. He seemed to be a guy that was thwarting the efforts of Republicans around the nation and of Republicans in Georgia and election integrity people everywhere. He was thwarting the effort for any accountability, and he did not do the things necessary to prevent Georgia from certifying the fraudulent and fake win of Joseph Robinette Biden. Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. So skipping down in the article. Perhaps most importantly, Trump has spoken to Kemp about a potential Senate run in February when the nation's governors were meeting in Washington, according to a source briefed on the conversation. While Trump made no commitments to Kemp, the fact that the president spoke with him has been viewed positively in GOP circles, given that Trump lambasted the governor for years after Kemp refused to overturn the president's 2020 election loss in Georgia. It's a very personal decision, but we're going to give him every reason to run, Thune told CNN, noting that Kemp was looking over his options and consulting with his family. Thune said, "We're all in." In multiple instances, Trump and his team have signaled that they want to put up the best candidates, not simply the biggest MAGA acolytes, in a critical show of cooperation for a party that has been hobbled by ugly infighting over candidates in recent years, including between Trump and the party establishment in 2022. According to multiple GOP strategists briefed on the discussions, they're focused on winning and finding the candidates that can win, period. And we are being told that Brian Kemp is very popular in Georgia. And he might have some popularity among Republicans in Georgia. But at any moment, if Trump was like, yeah, that's not the right guy, it's got to be this other guy, everyone would immediately leave Brian Kemp. So his popularity is entirely irrelevant and dependent on Donald Trump. His popularity is a factor of Brian Kemp being the Republican governor of Georgia and Georgia Republicans being like, hey, I'm glad our state is Republican now. But if we see some of this election stuff turn around in the near future, then characters like Doug Ducey in Arizona and Brian Kemp, obviously, in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, well, they all might get a new look. Because if the process was playing out and it needed to play out this way to arrive at the proper conclusion, and these guys took the public reputation hit, which was enormous, on behalf of that cause for 4+ years now, that's the sort of thing that would probably garner quick forgiveness from MAGA. I know I would be like, all right, man, this is one of the theories that we talked about the entire time. There was a possibility. I didn't think that that was the strongest possibility. I didn't think that's how it was going to go, but it turned out that it did go that way. So there's you got to keep the option open. And this talk is interesting. You know, they want to defeat Jon Ossoff. Jon Ossoff was one of those guys that came in the fake runoff election of early 2021 in Georgia. And he's been there since. We're going to have an interesting time if we still get through the elections next year, if that's still a thing that's happening. But Brian Kemp would be then in that position because a win by Brian Kemp could be sold to Georgia and nationwide in the context of the rest of the narratives that they're spinning. And so we'll see how that goes, what part impeachment plays in that. But it's not going to make the elections real. Herschel Walker almost beat, in a fake election, Raphael Warnock just last year. So are we going to get a new opportunity? Or was that in 2022? Maybe that was 2022. Maybe that was somebody check me on my Georgia election history. One of those was a replacement, I think. Now, Warnock came in 2021. That was the replacement. And then I think maybe 2022, whatever. Moving forward. So will Brian Kemp have a second life? Will he be resuscitated, brought back from the dead? Well, maybe that's a little dramatic. But if it turns out that he played a part in ultimately revealing the truth of our elections after all of this time, if he did exactly what he was supposed to do, that guy's going to be looked at as a hero. And I think it's reasonable to confer that status even on people who we've written off and derided for years now, if that's how things come around. Because to think that there's nothing else going on behind the scenes and that what's playing out on television is actually what's happening in the world of American politics and geopolitics is insane. And so understanding that, you have to then leave open as a possibility that something else has been playing out in the background. Now, we talked about Ken Griffin last week. This is the New York Post yesterday. Citadel's Ken Griffin faces MAGA attack at Milken Institute shindig, nationalists versus globalists. And so we have the same story once again. Mike Waltz, traditionalist Republican, neocon, war hawk. Those are character aspects, if not his true identity, at least. Brian Kemp, the man who failed to stand up for Trump in Georgia after the fake election, a man who is responsible not only for Joe Biden serving as fake president, but Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff serving as fake senators in Georgia. And the rest of Georgia's, and the rest, he bears responsibility for the rest of Georgia's fake elections to some degree. So, good guy, bad guy. The impeachment issue and Republicans running on the impeachment of Donald Trump. Good guy, bad guy. Is that evil twin or good twin? And here we have nationalists versus globalists, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the key battle still remaining. And I would say adjacent to that, but part of the same thing, is the same group of nationalists, which is not the best possible label. It's more the populist side that is critical. There, populist nationalism. Steve Bannon talks about this frequently. I think the nationalism, as far as America First, makes sense, but it's America First and these other countries can be first as well. That's not the same scary nationalism we're always told about. But regardless, with the tech globalists, the tech libertarians, those people who are still Trump aligned, all of them with the traditional GOP, the GOP establishment and elite, and these kind of Republican supporting globalist donors, those are the battles still to fight. And so it's very important to be able to discern one side from the other, which is why we focus so much time on it. So let's get into this. Allies of President Trump are angling for a showdown with tariff-bashing hedge fund mogul Ken Griffin at a glitzy Los Angeles shindig for financial elites this week, with Steve Bannon casting it as nationalists versus globalists in Beverly Hills. Citadel boss Griffin traditionally hosts the VIP champagne-fueled welcome soiree at the Milken Institute Global Conference, an annual gathering for America's top corporate titans dubbed the Davos of the West, and is one of the California Forum's main sponsors. But this year, as he helps open the up to $50,000 a head boondoggle at the Beverly Hilton, Griffin will face a rival reception hosted at the same hour at the Peninsula Beverly Hills next door, stealthily organized by senior Trump advisor Rick Grinnell. An invite to Grinnell's uber-exclusive behind closed doors event obtained by the Post will also feature brief remarks from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. It will be your only chance of talking to Bessent in private, said one source, who said that a few dozen hand-picked heads of state and Wall Street titans would be in attendance. Sources close to the organizers had just 75 places. Bannon said nationalists versus globalists. A source close to Griffin told the Post on Sunday, rather than scheduling cocktail parties in Beverly Hills hosted by self-proclaimed populists, the administration should be focused on economic policies that work for all Americans, not just the connected few. And we heard Ken Griffin's comments last week about how Trump, through these tariffs, was putting the American brand at risk. And I'm sure that Ken Griffin is probably more savvy than he is letting on, because he is playing the media game. And in doing so, in taking that side, he has to misrepresent the other side. There's no way he can talk about the good aspects of tariffs or the fact that tariffs are being implemented to reorder the global financial system, in which case America's brand as the critical hegemonic proxy state of the global regime is irrelevant, because the global regime, the one world liberal international rules-based order, would then be breaking down into a multipolar world order. So of course the United States would not be a global hegemon as a proxy of the global regime in that situation. That's the branding change. Ken Griffin has to make that sound bad, because traditionally the entire point of all of this is to attract donor money to these various countries to help them implement the regime agenda that keeps all of the global elite wealthy and powerful. Of course he's going to be mad at this sort of thing. It's going to be great to see the difference between these two events, and I expect that we'll probably get a number of video clips and sound bites out of these events. It'll be interesting to hear kind of the difference in tone, and you've kind of seen a preview of it there. Trump shouldn't be doing what Trump's doing. Trump should instead be doing what Ken Griffin and his pals want him to be doing, because that's how it's always worked in the past. How can you tell us that's not how it's going to work in the future? We're still the rich, powerful guys. We're the ones who get to say how things are going to go. Checking the chat briefly. Crystal Anon gifted 5 subscriptions. Thank you very much. And hopefully people in the chat got to grab some of those. And you can thank Crystal Anon as well. Thank you guys for all of the nice comments and welcome backs as well. Here's another issue that we have been following for quite a long time. A new wrinkle, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but in the Hill, Trump says he's willing to extend pause on TikTok ban again. This was from the Kristen Welker interview, and we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. But he said he has a little sweet spot in his heart for the app because of how well he did under Young Americans. Early last month, the president signed an executive order barring enforcement for 75 days of a law passed by Congress last year, requiring TikTok's parent company, the Chinese-owned ByteDance, to divest from the app or deal with a ban in the United States. Trump originally gave TikTok a 75-day break from a ban earlier in his second term. And so we're just going to keep extending these things. The current 75-day extension goes till about the middle of June, and then we may see it extended beyond that. I am very interested in how all that's going to go. We've talked about this many times. The TikTok issue arose in 2020. It seemed like they did the thing already in 2020. But then it was taken to court. The court decided against what the Trump administration wanted to do. So they just said, oh, I guess we didn't do it then, even though the data is housed at Oracle. And even though it just keeps being okay, maybe one day we'll find out that we don't need to ban it at all. Oh, look, they've been divested. And it seems like one of those things, and I think the pattern applies to the debt ceiling discussions and the government shutdown discussions, those deadlines that seem like they're going to be critical markers for the advancement of this plan as it is laid out and executed. Those are flexible and can be pushed back. And when they are pushed back, well, that's like the groundhog. Is it a groundhog? I think it's a groundhog, right? Somebody's going to correct me on that. It sounds wrong. But it's not a groundhog. What the hell is that thing that comes up and sees its shadow? And then they're like, oh, it's 6 more weeks of winter. Well, we're going to have 75 more days of reruns. Every time these deadlines are pushed back, they make some little deal so that the bad thing's not going to happen. Just seems like they're pushing that deadline back again. And we've said the same thing. I've said the same thing on some of the disclosure of election fraud evidence for now 2 years. Trump said he was going to have that press conference in 2 weeks, back when Fani Willis first filed her indictment in Georgia, and we still haven't seen it. Maybe one day. But until then, you can just keep extracting concessions from the regime, allowing the story to play out with people's rapt attention focused on what the actual truth is and how they've been misled. You can continue to play that out indefinitely, especially in a period like right now, where aside from the Trump deranged, people don't really think their lives are going terribly or spiraling into the abyss. That was different in 2020, 2021, 2022. And in a more narrative sense, throughout 2023 and 2024, as the country kind of realized, oh yeah, there is an immigration problem. And oh yeah, this Ukraine war thing is going, is not what we were told it was. And this Israel thing is not going great. So all of those big picture crises lead people to believe, yes, things are going bad in the world. We need to change. Hence Donald Trump's re-recognition as President of the United States of America. But prior to that, when people were kept from doing their jobs, when businesses were closed, when vaccine mandates were being implemented, when the economy was tanking and people were losing their homes, people were falling into addiction and despair and anxiety, and domestic abuse was on the rise, and all these things throughout 2020, 2021, 2022. Well, at that point, the negative effects are a lot more localized, a lot more individualized. And that means that playing this plan out longer to damage the enemy even more, strengthen the position even further, there's less downside there because people aren't being directly hurt by all of these things. Not that the TV's not giving examples. It is a groundhog. Thank you. Not that the TV's not happy to give examples of how Donald Trump is destroying their lives. Karamaga, $10. Welcome back, Chris. APL. And I see your APL. And I raise you a makeup APL. And if you're thinking, what the hell is that? Because this is the first time you've ever watched this show. Well, that is my tribute to Anna Paulina Luna. And when we talk about Anna Paulina Luna, we need to play the tribute to her. Now, that is how Eddie Murphy as Buckwheat says her name. And that's also how he says buckwheat. So at least when he's doing that impression. I don't know about how he says it on a normal basis. I would guess that he says it correctly. Now, while we're on the subject of our online world, this article was sent my direction by Starborn yesterday from Reason, which says free minds and free markets, they used to be the super red-pilled libertarian site, and they are now Trump deranged as well. The IRS says your digital life is not your property. And how about that? Your digital life, your data, is not your property. When the IRS secretly demands your financial records and private information from a third party without a warrant, what rights do you still have? That's the question at the heart of Harper v. O'Donnell, which is before the Supreme Court. New Hampshire resident Jim Harper is fighting back against the IRS after discovering he was swept up in a massive digital dragnet. The case could redefine how the Fourth Amendment applies in the age of cloud storage, and it may determine whether your emails, location history, search queries, and financial records that tech companies store on your behalf are treated as your property. In 2016, the IRS ordered the cryptocurrency exchange Coinbase to hand over transaction records of over 14,000 customers. Harper was among them, and only learned of the government's records grab after the IRS sent him a warning letter, mistakenly suggesting he'd underreported his cryptocurrency income. He soon discovered the IRS had his transaction logs, wallet addresses, and public keys, allowing the agency to monitor any future transactions he made. Harper hadn't done anything wrong. He'd simply used a legal platform to buy and sell cryptocurrency, but his digital footprint became visible to the government overnight. Now that is insane. That's an incredible amount of information for the government to have in the age of cryptocurrency. And again, of course, you can apply this to everything you do online. Once it goes into that cloud storage, if it's not your property, if it's the property of the cloud storage company, well, then they can sell it to whomever they like. And of course, that's been happening for well over a decade, maybe multiple decades. And that is part of how the algorithm influences and runs our lives. Companies collect our data. It is then claimed as their own property, and then it's sold and repurposed. Now he's suing the IRS, not just to protect his own privacy, but to force the agency to delete the records it obtained and to establish a broader legal principle that digital records stored on third-party platforms can be the property of the user who created them. Harper argues that Coinbase's own terms of service make clear that the data belonged to him, not the platform, and therefore the IRS should have been required to get a warrant before accessing the information. The federal government, including the IRS and local police, argue that recognizing ownership would impede surveillance and law enforcement. And so you just have to trust them that they are only doing all of this to keep you safe. Lower courts dismissed Harper's arguments, citing the third-party doctrine, a legal doctrine from the 1970s that says Americans lose their Fourth Amendment protections if they share information or records with businesses. That's pretty incredible. We'll see how all of this goes as the unwinding takes place. Today, when nearly every aspect of our lives is stored and synced through digital intermediaries, the doctrine has become a gaping loophole for mass surveillance. Financial regulators in particular are eager to exploit this loophole to vacuum up Americans' financial records without a warrant. Harper's case attempts to bring digital records back within Fourth Amendment protections. The Constitution protects our property, and the Supreme Court has long recognized that seizures of personal property require legal justification. When judges review digital surveillance, the first question they must ask is not whether data were shared with a third party, but whether the records belong to the person who created those records. And so that is going to be quite an issue and is going to have massive implications that go well beyond these types of digital records, cryptocurrency records, and the IRS's access. So immediately you understand it's not just the IRS, it's all of government. Do they have the ability to pierce this 1970 law? Is this 1970 law valid in the first place? Does this 1970 law apply to the digital world? And if so, if these companies own all our information, then what prevents them from accessing anything we do? Keystrokes logged in our interactions with web-based platforms, digital wallets, etc., to control our currencies. That's kind of a big deal, as is the social media aspect. We need to get to a point where our data is not able to be accessed by other parties. And I don't know how we get there. And the reason I say I don't know how we get there is not because I don't think that the political mission could be accomplished. It's that the political mission being accomplished, I would think, still does not get us all the way there. I don't know if there's a way we can fully protect that kind of data. Maybe there will be systems that emerge, whether they're Bitcoin based or some other like next wave of tech based. There may be systems emerge that can protect our data. Maybe some of the decentralization protects that. That's a hope. But Otherwise, we just have to be really careful about what we put online, or accept it and just understand that we are living in conjunction with the machine, and then guide ourselves accordingly. Maybe it's just part of life at some point. And some people would think maybe that sounds defeatist. This is just a total violation of American principles. And on some level, I totally agree with you. I'm just trying to address the practical aspects. And unless we're going to get off of many of these platforms and not take advantage of some of these technologies at all, you've kind of already crossed the line and opened yourself up to many of these problems. I don't know then that our system of laws is going to be able to say us. Let us continue. On the subject of judges. This is Fox News from, is it Friday? Friday. Bold and fearless, Trump launches new wave of judicial nominations. President Trump announced his first judicial nominee of his second term, kicking off what will be an historic 4 years as he continues to build on the most consequential accomplishment of his first term by appointing even more bold and fearless judges. The stakes could not be higher as Democrat activist judges are actively sabotaging American voters, the presidency, our Constitution, and our country. Trump nominated Whitney Hermendorfer to a Tennessee-based seat on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. She's a brilliant mind and committed constitutionalist who has litigated critical First Amendment issues. Trump's first nomination stands in stark contrast to the Obama and Biden-appointed Democrat activist judges, blah, blah, blah. Where are we here? Skipping down toward the end. Trump's judicial impact extended beyond the Supreme Court. He appointed 54 judges in his first term, second only to President Jimmy Carter's 56 in a single term. Carter benefited enormously from the Democrat-controlled Congress's creation of 35 new circuit judgeships during his term. Congress created none for Trump. More importantly, Carter did not appoint any Supreme Court justices. Trump's impact on the judiciary dwarfs Carter's by any reasonable metric. And so it sounds like we're going to get another round of that this term, and that should have some impact on the disastrous decisions that we're seeing produced. But then again, we may come to find out within the next few months or next few years that the Supreme Court itself becomes seen as legitimate throughout the American public. And if that happens, then the Supreme Court will have no more power, no more real power. They can render opinions. We have to get through the ideas about judicial supremacy and judicial review. Those are not constitutional. The Supreme Court, all the courts, can weigh in, but there is no enforcement mechanism. And it's important to highlight that. I actually posted this on Truth Social yesterday in reading about some of these issues. The judiciary has no influence over either the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or of the wealth of the society, and can take no active resolution whatever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend on the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. And that is none other than Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 78. The courts have already usurped their authority. If we come to find out, I think President Trump mentioned this last week, that the court's legitimacy is in question. And I agree that the legitimacy of the courts is in question. The court system beyond the Supreme Court and its legitimacy is also in question. It can be removed by an act of Congress, and perhaps it should be. So these judgeships may be important, but they also might not be important. And maybe once the federal codes are brought into alignment with the Constitution, there might not be such a need for federal lawsuits on federal issues, and the federal court system would then become redundant. These issues, most issues, can be settled at the state level, and the government shouldn't be doing anything close to what it's doing today. And because it's doing all these things, well, then that is the basis for the need for all of these courts to adjudicate what the federal government is doing or what the people are, quote unquote, allowed to do related to federal government laws and rules and regulations and statutes and the rest. Continuing on. Speaking of all of the court proceedings, this was kind of a piece of hilarious panic from none other than election fraud attorney Marc Elias, and I am having a little problem here finding that clip. I don't know. Here we are. He was on 60 Minutes. This is very panicky, if you ask me.
With a case that is opposed to the President of the United States, and the law firm will think, do we really want to take this case?
We're already there. They are deciding not to take on certain kinds of clients that might upset the administration, or not taking on certain kinds of causes that might put them in the crosshairs of the administration.
If lawyers give up their independence, what is lost?
The rule of law. And this is why the business community ought to care. Today, it might be that, Donald Trump thinks he can take over the election system through one of his executive orders. Tomorrow, maybe it's the banking system. After that, maybe it's contracts. Maybe he decrees, I'm going to decide which contracts are binding and which contracts aren't binding. So the legal system is fundamental to how our society operates, how capitalism operates, and everyone should have a stake in that.
Are we reaching?
So Marc Elias is referring to the system as we have come to understand it over the course of our lives. That system is thoroughly corrupted. It is totally unconstitutional. And it is, the vast majority of it is based on the 14th Amendment installed during the Reconstruction period at the tip of a bayonet. That was how the ratification of the 14th Amendment came through. And as Columbia Law School professor George P. Fletcher argues in Our Secret Constitution, the goal of the Civil War was to overthrow and replace the Constitution, to replace the republic with a democracy, to replace a focus on the preservation of individual rights with the good of the state as a motivation, and to go from individual sovereignty to equality. And now we have a government that is empowered to enforce equality by having purview over everyone's business transactions and personal interactions. And that is an untenable way for a society to continue forward, particularly with the corruption within that system. If the system was not corrupt and we still had this system, I'm still not sure that it would be a fair and just system, because the society has been geared toward ideologies and ideals that are antithetical to the American founding and to the purpose of to the intended purpose of this country at the founding. Elias posted this on his Democracy Docket website on Saturday. It's an interesting argument here. And interesting, particularly because we would agree that Donald Trump is not a regular president. The courts must stop presuming Donald Trump is a regular president, writes Elias. If there's one thing that is clear from Donald Trump's first 100 days, It's that he is not a regular president, but the courts continue to treat him as one, which is what has us barreling towards a full-blown constitutional crisis. So the courts are being too nice to Donald Trump. Jack Goldsmith, a conservative law professor at Harvard, recently described the way courts typically approach presidents. Conservative law professor at Harvard. Sure he is. Much of our law depends on a presumption of regularity in the presidency. It depends on the courts thinking that they can trust the president to comply with orders and to be honest and truthful in court, which is essentially just the understanding that the president will agree that judicial review and judicial supremacy are constitutional when they are not actually usurpations of the constitutional order. So what Marc Elias and what Goldsmith are saying is that it is expected of the president that the president will play along with the corruption of the system, following the norms. As Professor Goldsmith suggests, much flows from the presumption of regularity. Courts assume that the president and his administration act in good faith, that their actions are lawful, that their statements truthful, and their motivations honest. As one early Supreme Court case stated, government officials, quote, are assumed to be men of conscience and intellectual discipline, capable of judging a particular controversy fairly on the basis of its own circumstances. Marc Elias said that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton, who, of course, he was at the law firm that was directly involved with Russiagate, along with Hillary Clinton in 2016 and 2015. That's Marc Elias. So this guy says that is arguing using the assumption that government officials are men of conscience and intellectual discipline, capable of judging a particular controversy fairly on the basis of its own circumstances. And of course, he would say Trump is not that. The consequences of this presumption are profound. Courts are reluctant to second-guess the administration's motivations, unlikely to probe into the government's internal processes, and often dismissive of claims of improper bias. In litigation, this means it's difficult to obtain discovery against the government. In criminal cases, it presents a nearly insurmountable hurdle to claims of improper motive for prosecution, such as selective prosecution based on political considerations. It is why the Solicitor General is often called the 10th Justice of the Supreme Court, and why federal prosecutors and DOJ lawyers are treated by judges as truth-tellers in complex situations. They receive the benefit of the doubt when errors are made and are granted courtesies often denied to private litigants. And again, I would suggest that Marc Elias is sounding like he's saying the Solicitor General, this time, John Sauer. Trump mentioned him by name, actually, in the Kristen Welker interview yesterday. He's not Marc Elias' guy. He's not a regime guy. The Solicitor General is not going to make the arguments on behalf of this corrupted system that has to be unwound and done away with. The presumption of regularity has been the subject of debate for decades. It has no clear basis in the Constitution, a document that is largely suspicious of government power. In some cases, it even conflicts with the presumption of innocence or the rules of evidence. Whatever the merits of narrowing or abolishing this presumption in the past, it is now imperative that courts limit its application and importance. Today, the Trump administration regularly relies on the presumption of regularity as its go-to defense in lawsuits brought by plaintiffs seeking to halt illegal government actions and protect democracy. Too often, the presumption of regularity hinders courts from delving into the true motivations behind the government actions. And so Trump, again, Elias is arguing that there needs to be a special case made for Trump, which is the sort of argument you would be making if you were certain from a position of pretty substantial information as Elias has, that Sorry, I totally ran myself off track there, thinking about Elias, the presumption. Hold for processing. I can't believe that just totally escaped me. It'll come back to me. Let's just continue on. In one recent lawsuit, the government argued executive actions that are facially valid, that is, within the lawful authority of the executive, are entitled to a presumption of regularity. In plain terms, if the government says it acted lawfully and with good intentions, the court must take its word for it. End of story. Okay. And so that's the thing. Elias wants there to be two separate systems. Trump is the exception. If you're going to argue that Trump is actually just involved in this grand trick to dog walk us into the darkest dystopia we could ever imagine, well, then things like this don't really make sense. If that was the case, he wouldn't be treated as though he is entirely exceptional in the history of American presidents. And they wouldn't need to argue that Trump should not be considered as other presidents are considered. He can't even be given the presumption of good intent. He has to be seen by the courts, Marc Elias is arguing, as inherently evil with only bad motivations. It's pretty extreme. Unless it is pared back now, the Trump administration's abuse of the presumption of regularity will only grow. Trump has already singled out specific law firms and universities for punishment, targeted individuals by name for investigation, and instructed the Department of Justice to investigate the Democrat Party's leading online donation platform. And so Elias is having a big problem with the investigation into Act Blue, which finances the election theft scheme and may well finance Marc Elias. And he's concerned that these DC white shoe law firms who have engaged in lawfare perpetually in support of the regime and against any dissent, his tools are being taken away. That's got to be very scary for a man like Marc Elias, who again was involved in crimes against America and would be the sort of person you would think, unless there's something really crazy going on behind the scenes, the sort of person you would think would end up at Alcatraz or Gitmo. Trump's taste for vengeance against political enemies will only intensify, as will his contempt for courts. The cat and mouse game he has played with federal judges is rapidly turning into outright defiance. At every stage, the government asserts the presumption of good faith and regularity to shield itself from the judicial scrutiny democracy requires. In a normal administration, we could expect the independence of the DOJ to act as a check. Indeed, part of the presumption of regularity is based on the professional ethics of lawyers who appear before judges on behalf of the government. Pam Bondi has made clear she rejects this role for herself and her department. Contrary to past practice, she views herself as the president's lawyer, carrying out his wishes and whims. She is part of his cheerleading team, advocating for his political agenda and burnishing his personal image. And I have not seen any of that. I mean, maybe he's just providing her some defense, making her seem like a bad guy, even though she's the person who messed up the whole Epstein files thing. Now, and again, maybe that's all an op. I get it. I understand. It's like you say one thing and then everybody's like, well, wait a second. We in the community decided through that Truth Community Struggle session that we all have to agree that that was also part of the plan. In fact, everything that happens is part of the plan and everything is good until it turns bad. And then, is there ever accountability? Is there ever accountability for the mistakes that are made? Or even just an admission of mistakes? This is why we don't take hard stances, why we don't tell people that they must believe one thing or the other thing. This is why we simply consider potential possibilities for the future, discuss their likelihood, their potential impact, the consequences they might have, so that we can make sound, informed judgments rather than deciding well, Trump said this person's a hero. Retarded. Oh, wait. I had to update some of my clips today, so.
Get stupid, get retarded, get retarded, get retarded. Let's get retarded. Let's get retarded in here. Let's get retarded. Let's get retarded in here.
I actually hate the Black Eyed Peas, and I hate that song. But that shit's still funny. All right, we're coming down to the end of this. While some judges have begun to push back, their response remains far too gentle. After the administration denigrated a court order in one of the law firm cases, the judge cautioned that the intentional additional promulgation of derogatory statements about plaintiff across all the executive branch agencies hardly appeared to comply with the temporary restraining order and raised some concern about the general presumption by courts that executive officials will act in good faith. Now, that is a stretch. They're not allowed to say mean things about the plaintiffs. Well, that's not part of the legal case. They're allowed to express their opinions about these law firms. It is amazing. Consider what sort of advantage these people understand themselves to have when they are immediately suggesting that the way things have always worked is no longer okay, even though they put the rules in place that make up the way things have always worked. The time has come for the judiciary to scrap the presumption of regularity. It is yet another outdated norm that we can no longer afford. Those fighting to preserve democracy already face a daunting task, without judges reflexively giving Trump the benefit of the doubt just because he's president, with an obvious and overwhelming mandate from the people who are the final authority, well beyond the judges and the lawyers and the politicians and the Congress and the rest of it. The people are the final authority. And the people have not only decided to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt, they decide over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to continue giving him the benefit of the doubt. The courts have to give Trump the benefit of the doubt because that's what his job calls for. And it's what the people's mandate calls for. Donald Trump is not a regular president, says Elias, and the courts must stop treating him like one. He's an aspiring autocrat who weaponizes the legal process to undermine the rule of law. Through his words and conduct, he and his administration have forfeited the right to be believed or trusted. It is time to take Trump both literally and seriously. He literally seeks vengeance against his political opponents. No, he seeks justice for crimes committed. And I'm sorry, Marc Elias, that includes you. And also, I hate sorry, not sorry, but that's appropriate here. He literally wants to send American citizens to foreign gulags. Well, he also wants to send them to domestic gulags, Mark, just to be fair. And the American citizens, again, are ones who have committed crimes against America, like you. And so I don't think he'd have a hard time selling that to the people. Again, that's what matters. Hey, you want to go to a situation or a system where that's not how it works? Okay. But then you'd have to go back well before the Constitution. And, I'm open to it. If our democracy is to survive this president intact, the court must take all of this very, very seriously. And sorry, Mark, your democracy is not going to survive intact. That is kind of the point. All right. Let's just quickly, we're going to tear through this Politico article. One last thing on the judiciary, and then we'll get to Kristen Welker, and we are going to have to save the International Crisis Group report on Trump's first 100 days to a later date. Hopefully Wednesday. All right. Politico from Thursday. The Supreme Court could unleash chaos on the economy. So what are they going to do? Team up with Donald Trump and make super tariffs? In less than 2 weeks, two extraordinary elements of the Donald Trump legal saga will collide. The battle to bring down Trump tariffs and the Trump administration's fight to prevent judges from blocking his policies across the country. The Court of International Trade is set to hold oral argument on May 13th in one of the growing number of cases that challenge the bulk of the Trump tariff regime. The lawsuits, which are strong on the merits, according to Politico, argue that the tariffs are not legally authorized under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, the law that Trump has invoked. And that's the IEEPA. It's going to come up again. At issue is a motion for a preliminary nationwide injunction to put a stop to the tariffs filed by the Liberty Justice Center, which is representing a New York-based alcohol importer and distributor known as VOS Selections, along with 4 other small businesses that say the tariffs could decimate their companies. So this immediately appealed to me as like the Colorado cake shop that was sued multiple times. They basically found a place, they searched for a place that would not bake a wedding cake for a gay couple and decorate it accordingly, and then sued that place over the issue. And they did it multiple times. So they will locate an organization that is harmed and then attempt to win the legal argument on the basis of that ostensible harm. And so they found one here, VOS Selections. And again, I say that because it's not VOS Selections. It doesn't seem to be VOS Selections leading the effort for this litigation. It's filed by the Liberty Justice Center. Just one wrinkle. 2 days later, the Supreme Court will consider whether to crack down on judges' power to check the administration in precisely this way. The justices will hear oral argument in the Trump administration's request to overturn a series of nationwide injunctions, currently halting Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship. And if I'm not mistaken, this is going to be next Thursday, the 15th. Trump advisors like Stephen Miller have been enraged by the ability of a single lower court to issue injunctions that hamstring the president's agenda across the country. The administration has asked the Supreme Court to prevent universal injunctions from becoming universally acceptable. So the court's handling of the issue is being closely watched by lawyers across the country, including those handling the tariff cases. So what we have here, what the basis for this argument ultimately is, can one of these courts decide in favor of this one small business and have that decision apply nationwide as an injunction that says the government is not allowed to do this? They're not allowed to do this in this one case where this plaintiff brought the case, and they're not allowed to do it in any other prospective cases. And so therefore, the policy itself is voided. If the Supreme Court does end up striking down nationwide injunctions, it could pose a huge hurdle to those who oppose the tariffs, which have upended the global economy and emerged as one of Trump's biggest political liabilities, blah, blah, blah. There is an issue where it would be impractical for the Supreme Court to apply tariffs to half the states, but not the other half. Oregon State Attorney General Dan Rayfield said in a statement, Rayfield and Democrat attorneys general from 11 other states have filed their own suit challenging the tariffs in the Court of International Trade. This isn't a concern. So the issue being that the court simply can't decide it's not okay for these tariffs over here, but it's okay for other tariffs. Therefore, they have to have this ability to bring forward a nationwide injunction, and they're going to try to stop that overall. Now, these nationwide injunctions have been critical on a whole range of issues. So this aspect of this case is going to be enormous in front of the Supreme Court. And again, ultimately, the Supreme Court's legitimacy will be determined by the people's understanding of its adherence to the original Constitution ultimately. Okay? I'm not saying how many iterations and reruns we are going to have to go through of these issues before the people learn and understand these things, but the court's legitimacy is going to be entirely determined by whether or not the people see their decisions as being constitutionally sound once the people's understanding develops to that point. And I think we're on the road there. The Supreme Court has considerable leeway, and I'm jumping down here, to tackle the injunction question in the context of the birthright citizenship case. But the Trump administration has made its position clear. All nationwide injunctions are unconstitutional, the government's lawyers claim, because they exceed the district court's authority under Article 3 and gravely encroach on the president's executive power under Article 2. The administration has urged the justices to declare that enough is enough and rule that lower courts can issue injunctions that apply only to the parties in the cases before them. That would be a major change. That would be huge. And that would wreck the business model of someone like Marc Elias, who will take some isolated case that is perfectly set up to abuse the law and the legal loopholes in exactly the ways their legal strategy dictates. They will find the perfect case, bring that case, and then use that case to achieve a nationwide injunction that will cover any instance that has similarities to that case. It's a very devious scheme. It's almost like all this stuff was set up by people who believed that morality was a function of adherence to the law and had no objective basis beyond that. Well, everybody's decided that this is what the law is, or, of course, it was passed down from on high in some cases. And nothing else has happened that would change the moral calculation. Opponents of nationwide injunctions who believe they are unconstitutional sometimes point to other mechanisms that lawyers can use to seek broad relief that effectively applies nationally, but it is far from clear that those mechanisms would prove to be adequate substitutes or would even be available in the tariff cases. Plaintiffs, for instance, can file claims under the Administrative Procedures Act to set aside unlawful agency actions, but the law may not be applicable in tariff litigation. The Supreme Court has held that the APA does not apply to actions taken by the president himself. And let's just skip down a few paragraphs before the end. The Supreme Court is expected to rule in the birthright citizenship case sometime this summer, but it is unclear how quickly the Court of International Trade could rule in the VOS litigation. That could create a potentially awkward dynamic for the judges handling the case, who may find themselves considering whether to issue a nationwide injunction at the same time that the Supreme Court is considering whether that remedy is even available as a matter of law. And so, if you are considering the legitimacy of these courts, and particularly in this case, the International Court of Trade, or the Court of International Trade, their legitimacy is going to hinge on whether or not they decide in the same direction the Supreme Court decides. This could be a good indicator. I'm not saying it necessarily will be, but it could be, especially if they rule properly on this. I would expect that the Supreme Court will get this one right. It seems like this is the sort of case that is meant to go all the way up to the top. The fact that it's at the Supreme Court already, I think, is a good sign. This is one of those instances where the rules of the game need to be set so that everybody can see them and understand. The lines in the field need to be drawn, and then let's go play the game. This seems like part of that pattern where it ends up at the Supreme Court, and all of a sudden we get the understanding. There were some big Supreme Court decisions last year, like the removal of administrative courts in Jarkisi versus SEC. Those are big courts. The end of the Chevron doctrine. These are big court cases. Sorry. This would be huge. And if the Court of International Trade decides in a way opposite the Supreme Court, well, they're immediately going to look illegitimate. They're not, that would be a terrible look, to be hearing a case, then listening to the Supreme Court justices and the arguments on both sides 2 days later, and then deciding in a way that seems like is going to be going in the opposite direction of the Supreme Court. Very precarious situation. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out. Needless to say, it is not clear how the justices will resolve the issue. In the narrowest possible resolution, the Supreme Court could issue a ruling that applies only to the nationwide injunctions in the birthright citizenship cases and kick the can on whether these sorts of injunctions are available in other cases. That outcome would be a victory for plaintiffs in the tariff cases, but it's unclear how likely it is. A targeted ruling like that could ultimately prove unappealing to the justices, particularly the Republican appointees, given the sharp political controversy that has emerged since lower courts have issued nationwide injunctions blocking many of Trump's executive actions in his first months in office. Alternatively, a majority of the justices could uphold the use of nationwide injunctions, but there are also a variety of intermediate options. A majority of the court could, for instance, heighten the standard for issuing nationwide injunctions, perhaps by requiring lower court judges to find that there has been a violation of settled law before issuing such orders. A majority of the justices could also limit the geographic. You hit 2.5 hours and it starts just going immediately downhill. A majority of the justices could also limit the geographic scope of injunctions, perhaps limiting them to the district or circuit in which the courts sit. Both disputes over tariffs and nationwide injunctions have the potential to be among the most consequential of Trump's second term, and they are about to become intertwined. The future of the American economy and Trump's presidency could depend on how it all shakes out, except it won't depend on how it all shakes out. You are increasing the drama effectively because you know how this thing's ultimately going to go, but even on that side, the global economic order is being reset. It's also being reset on our side, and that's what the tariffs are for, to take the ability to reset that system and then control that system away from the global regime. That's already locked in place. That's going to happen one way or another, and the courts are not going to take away that opportunity. Nothing is going to stop. What the courts can do is determine whether or not the public sees them as legitimate, because the end is already known. The end already exists past these cases. These cases do not dictate any sort of end. Oh, no, we've lost that one. No. It's just no. Checking the chat for a second, but let me continue. Maggie says, do we still have faith in SCOTUS? I think I just talked about that. I would suggest that we generally should not have faith in any of these people. Ever. Why would we put our faith or trust into the hands of public officials who cannot even prove their own legitimacy? Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of the people we are told is a Supreme Court justice, was nominated by a fake and illegitimate president and approved by a fake and illegitimate Senate. So right there, the court's illegitimate. Can they redeem themselves? Maybe. But I would suggest that the legitimacy of all parts of this government is gone. It's just gone. Okay? It's gone the way of the Constitution. The Constitution was overthrown 160 years ago, 155 years ago, whatever it is. Okay? I mean, it sucks because it feels like we're losing part of our heritage in saying that, and I get that. And it feels maybe unpatriotic to admit that the Constitution was overthrown by our enemies 150 years ago, and the system we've grown up in is not remotely close to what the founders intended. In fact, it is antithetical to what the founders intended. It's not a nice or comfortable place to be, but we can still recognize it as true. If there is a legitimate part of the government, it is Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. And Donald Trump primarily is serving as a story mechanism to tell the country all of these things, to wake the country up to the truth of exactly what has happened. So the court's legitimacy, I think, already seems to be fait accompli, if you ask me. But can they redeem themselves? Maybe. It would be great to have a stable system that actually worked. Not sure that's possible without the unwinding first. I don't think it is possible without the unwinding. But, you know, I'm patient enough to let the thing ride out and see what happens. All right, let's get into some of this Kristen Welker interview, and we'll save the rest for another day. Maybe I should just begin, and you guys can respond to this in the chat, by the way. Maybe I should just begin to make the subscriber stream all of the topics from shows within the week previous that I did not get to, and then catch up on the rest of the week's news on the Friday stream. I don't know. I'm not sure that's a good idea or not. Just came to mind right now. You can tell me. I'm going to do one of these Rumble ads real quick. And this is actually for Rumble Premium. And it's good that I just brought up the subscriber stream, because on Wednesday, we're going to have the subscriber stream on Substack. You can watch it on Substack. Or if you are a paid subscriber on Substack and have Rumble Premium, you can watch it on Rumble, as you may be doing right now. Otherwise, you're just going to have to watch on Substack. But when Rumble first started in 2013, they built a platform for the small creator. They didn't have biases. They didn't censor. They were fair and treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversation or censor opinions on COVID. But they did. Facebook admitted they fell to pressure from the Biden and Harris administration. Rumble did not. They held the line. They are attacked daily for giving us a voice to talk to you. They are attacked in corporate media. They are attacked by governments like France. They are attacked from brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate America is fighting to remove speech. Rumble is fighting to keep it. Rumble won't survive with brand advertisers. They don't get much of it. Watching this show on Rumble is the most Rumble can ask from you. But if you really believe in this fight and you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human right to free speech. Rumble is offering $10 off with the promo code STUDIO. When you purchase an annual subscription, go to rumble.com/premium and use promo code STUDIO. Like I said, if you have the means and believe in the cause, time is now to join Rumble Premium. And if you don't, you can still just keep watching on normal Rumble. And when it comes to my subscriber stream, you can watch it over on Substack. And the Substack platform for live streaming, it seems all right. It's not as convenient on the back end. It's a bit of a pain in the ass for me there. But, I mean, it's just an inconvenience. It's not a big deal. It's had a decent amount of people watching on that stream. It's basically like a second full former audience of the Rumble subscriber stream showing up on Substack as well. So it's kind of doubled the live audience, which is very cool. And a chat is kind of beginning to form over there. It's a little harder for me to keep an eye on it over there, but it is beginning to form over there. Okay, so into the Kristen Welker interview. Now, the two crazy things about this Kristen Welker interview. One is that throughout the entire interview, she seems to be arguing on behalf of, or maybe even negotiating on behalf of, the global regime. Every question is asked from a desperate and leveraged regime-oriented perspective. She is trying to indicate to Donald Trump, on behalf of the regime, that whatever he's about to do or thinking of doing or just did is absolutely terrible and destructive, and everybody agrees he should stop doing it, and will he stop doing it? And he's essentially laying out the terms for them. She is, in my view, just, I was going to say moderator, but she does moderate debates. She's just a go-between. She's a middleman. She's a messenger. She's an ambassador from the regime to Donald Trump. And it's broadcast on live television. Will you do this? Will you do that? It's a very interesting and strange and probably unethical stance for a quote-unquote journalist to take. But, I mean, these are intel assets. And they're operating on behalf of global intel. So we can't expect anything different. Liz Harrington posted about some of this vibe yesterday from Kristen Welker. She said, "What do you say to people who say," and then in brackets, insert negative propaganda piece here, right? Kristen Welker is repeating the terrible things that some news article says. 3 unnamed sources say this. Harrington says it's such an annoying way to frame every question in an hour-long fake news interview. And so I'm going to play some clips here, obviously, and you're going to hear a couple instances of that, and it is really grating. It's awful. She is like so whiny, so petty, so annoying, and so disrespectful. But this is what Trump has come to understand at this point and learn how to deal with. And he does a damn good job of it. And I think, again, this is one of those situations where the fact that the regime goes through with it only makes them look bad. And it could just be because they're so boxed in, they're so cornered in. Trust for media has dropped so much that they actually look bad while they're trying to make Donald Trump look bad. So there are going to be some clips that are around and went viral that a lot of people have talked about that I'm not going to play. I spent the hour listening to the interview. These were my notes. This is what I think was particularly interesting. This is Trump talking about our fake elections.
I think we're going to have an economy the likes of which we've never had before. You know, my 4 years were phenomenal, as you know, the stock market. In fact, even though we had to go through the COVID thing, that horrible situation with COVID, we did numbers. And when I gave it over, when I handed it over, the election was rigged. And because of that, we have a lot of problems, by the way. But when I handed it over, what happened? The market was higher than it was just previous to COVID coming in. Yeah. Nobody could believe it. The stock market I'm talking about.
I don't want to look back, but you did take your case to court about that. You took your case to court about your allegations against the election. Let me ask you,
sir. There's no question about it. The election was rigged. The facts are in, and it's still being litigated. Let's go.
You did take your case to court more than 60 times and didn't win those cases.
I won a lot of court cases.
Just to button that up, though, sir. Just to button that up.
What are you talking about?
How
the election
worried are you?
Are we talking about the election
Let's talk about here and now. Let's talk about
the
here and now.
election of 2020?
Let's not talk about. Let's talk about here and now. Are you worried about a recession?
Doesn't even want to hear him make the case. Let's listen to the critical moment one more time.
About your allegations against the election. Let me ask you,
sir. There's no question about it. The election was rigged. The facts are in, and it's still being litigated. Listen.
It's still being litigated. The election from November 2020 is still being litigated. What does that mean? Well, that means that a president, quote unquote, was inaugurated while the validity of his election was still being litigated. And this is something we've talked about for years on this show, but it is worth reiterating now because Trump is, again, making it clear to a national audience that the election is still being litigated. the election of 2020 is still being litigated. What does that mean? There have been cases for this entire time. It's not over. Can't be over. And if it's not over, then first off, if a president was inaugurated and served as president, fake president, yes, while the election, the validity of that election, the legitimacy of that election was being litigated, that president has usurped the presidency. That's all that can mean. The election's either legitimate or it's not. And until the legitimacy is determined, a new president cannot be inaugurated. What are we doing? And of course, it's important to remember that mainstream America and the Republican establishment went along with it. And we've heard very little about it since then. All we've heard is that 62 courts decided blah, blah, blah. It's incredible stuff. And he hasn't stopped talking about it. And again, he said this to Bret Baier in the Super Bowl interview.
Sports has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me. There are 7 swing states. I won them all by a lot.
But let me just get to the dismount here.
And I won the popular
Have
vote.
you thought about how to try to bring the country together?
Isn't it amazing that Fox News, the conservative outlet, and NBC, the degenerate communist outlet, have the same tactics for their main anchors? Trump starts talking about how the elections are fake. In that clip, he called the result of the 2024 election ridiculous. And they immediately try to cut away to another question using all their special journalist language. Oh, Kristen Welker's new thing. I'm going to cut you off by saying, let's just button this up. Let's just button this up. These people are pathetic. And you can see the ruse, right? You can see the sleight of hand. The trick is widely available to witness. This is what they do. Let us continue. She asked him about, without bringing up the names, she asked him about Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs. And here is Trump's response. I may have to cut this clip a little bit short because it's a long one, but here we go.
Talk about some of the other actions you've taken over the past 100 days. Last month, you directed your Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to review 2 people who you perceive to be your political adversaries. And yet you told me in December that you would not direct the Justice Department to investigate your political foes. What changed?
Well, no, I just look at people, and I'm not directing anybody. They looked at these 2 people. They might have known it, or they might have heard it from 2 years ago. One person said, he knew me so well. He was, I think, on CNN or MSDNC, but they're both failing networks. You're happy to know, even though one of them, I guess, is related to you in one form or another, although they're trying to cut him loose as fast as possible. But it was well known that this one person, it was almost like he was my brother. I don't even know who he is. Maybe he was there. Maybe he was in the Oval Office a few times as a surrogate for, somebody in some form of government, along with 25 other people that sat in the back of the room or stood in the back of a room. I have no idea who this guy is. And he's out there. And then he did a book called Anonymous. I think that's really subversion. I think it's spying. It's something really bad.
But you passed an executive order calling for your Attorney General to investigate that
for a long time. And the other one said that the election was so wonderful. It was such a, well, it turned out it wasn't a wonderful election. It was a corrupt election.
Let me ask it this way, sir, because when we talked in December, I asked you, what is your message to people who didn't vote for you? Let me remind you of what you said. You said, I love you, and we're going to all work together. How does pursuing your political foes help to unify
Did I really say I love you?
You really did. That's a direct quote.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, but I'd like to see.
I promise I'll show it to you. I'll show you the tape.
Look.
How does that help to unify
I want to
the
treat
country?
people fairly.
It's amazing. To be clear, again, Trump talks about how the election is illegitimate. She's selling the idea that Trump should not go after these people, again, because they're political opponents. We're always told he's going after political opponents. He's going after people who committed crimes, people who subverted the authority of the president in a national security environment in one case and an election environment in the other case, on behalf of the evil twin faction, on behalf of the uniparty, on behalf of the regime, subverting the presidency. And all he did was direct his attorney general to investigate. Imagine a scenario where the president cannot tell the attorney general to investigate something. Something comes across the president's desk. He finds out through whatever channels because he has exquisite access to information. He finds out that something's going on. He can't direct his attorney general to investigate what's going on. He can't write a presidential memo. Is he supposed to do it behind the scenes so that it's not official? And we're talking about, of course, a period following this fake and illegitimate Biden term where Joe Biden was legitimately going after his political opponent, Donald Trump, the former president, for crimes that were made up at the Brookings Institution by Norm Eisen. And, of course, on television. Television provided the evidence, really. I'm going to cut here toward the end, and I'm going to hope I get into a good spot because I'm conscious of the time, and I don't want to go through all of this very long clip.
Well, you know, they had their chance at the election, and they lost.
Here we are. I almost knew
Trump. I won the election.
It's out
almost
of an
knew.
There we go.
Here's one of those perfect examples.
Let me ask you big picture. People who have lived in countries like the Philippines, Hungary, Russia, they look at some of your actions going after civil service, going after universities, law firms, the media. They say it's out of an authoritarian playbook. What do you say to those who believe you are taking the country down an authoritarian path?
Well, there you go again. Why don't you ask it a different way? Many people wanted to come into our country. Many people love Trump. I won the election. They didn't win the election. I got a lot more votes than they did. I won the popular vote. I won all 7 swing states by a lot. A lot of people were surprised. I said, I think you could win 4, maybe 5. No, I won all 7, and I won by a lot. And I won, actually, I think there was a lot of hanky-panky going on, but it was too big to rig. That's the good news. It's too big to rig. But let me just say, so when you make these statements.
He said it again. Hanky-panky involved in the 2024 election. The one he won. The one that even truthers told us, well, you know, maybe election fraud's not a real thing since he won. Why did truthers spend 4 years not understanding how elections work and that elections are fake? Why did they spend election cycle after election cycle? In 2021, the off-year governor elections, 2022 midterms, 2023 off-year elections, and 2024 telling everyone to go vote hard and supporting Republicans because we need House and Senate seats and we need this and that. Did any of that stuff get done that they told you would get done if Republicans won? No, none of that stuff got done. Did Republicans win, even with extraordinary turnout? Only in Florida and Texas and Georgia, right? The MAGA candidates cost us the red wave in 2022, and that's why nothing got done. It was MAGA's fault. Again and again and again. Trump knows that the elections are fake. Trump says that the elections are fake. Trump says that the elections are still being litigated, and yet truthers are focusing us on fake midterms to get people to vote hard? Again? 5 years running? Still the same thing? Really? Kind of incredible, isn't it? Now, she asked him, people from these places are saying that you seem like you're taking the country down an authoritarian path. What would you say to these people? Now, Trump's more polite than I would be. I'd be like, where are you finding these people? How many people is this? Are these people going off an understanding of the bullshit that you, members of the fake news, tell them? They think that's reality and they're forming their opinions based on that stuff? Are those the kinds of people you're talking about? I mean, at some point, and he's not going to say this because he's a politician and it's not the sort of thing that he's going to say, but why would you care that Kristen Welker found some people who will say the thing that she needs them to say? It's the same dynamic, the same phenomenon we just talked about in the court example, the liquor distribution company that is concerned about the tariffs. The Liberty Justice Center finds a company that is affected by the tariffs, and then they have to represent that company so that they can get a nationwide injunction on the tariffs. That is a legal strategy to stop tariffs. It's not a business attempting to protect itself from the negative consequences of the tariffs. They're entirely different things. They sought it out so they could use it to make the point. And the same thing is true in this instance. They found people, and this is exactly the dynamic that was present throughout this interview. They said, oh, certain people are saying this. Certain countries think this. It's always, we found an example that suggests what you're doing is terrible. How do you respond to people who say that you're absolutely terrible? And please frame your answer within the understanding that those people are right and everything that we say on the news is true. That's an absurd way to conduct an interview with the president, but nonetheless, it has become our standard. Trump addresses the Mike Waltz. Don't want to call him Walls like Tim Walz. That would be terrible. That would be totally inappropriate. I would never do that.
This week, you reshuffled your national security team. Yeah. You moved National Security Advisor Mike Waltz to UN ambassador. Just to remind our viewers, Waltz, of course, started that unsecure text chain where sensitive information was shared. Mr. President, was that move a punishment?
No, I just think he'll do a nice job in the new position. Marco's doing an outstanding job. No, Marco won't keep. Marco's very busy doing other things, so he's not going to keep it long term. We're going to put somebody else in. But I think Mike, who's, as you know, he's a fine guy, and I think he'll do a very good job. Knows the countries, knows leadership, and I think he'll do a very good job at the United Nations. And in the meantime, Marco's really doing something special.
He's about to address a potential replacement. All of that, I think, is really interesting. Another thing to note, though, is remember what happened to the last UN ambassador, that being Elise Stefanik. She went back to, she kind of was removed from the administration at that point. Now, again, you can say that's political strategy or whatever, but what happens if it happens again? There were reports last week that the UN's running out of funding. The UN shouldn't exist. The United States shouldn't be a part of the UN. And so what does it mean to be appointed UN ambassador to an organization that is failing and dying? Maybe it's helpful. Maybe it's just another opportunity for Mike Waltz to operate with the globalists, and we'll see what happens. Maybe he's the ideal person to have that interchange with them. But man, oh man, it seems like he's getting shipped off to Siberia, and the next stop after UN ambassador is no longer being in politics. We'll see what happens with Stefanik. They're saying that she's the front runner for New York governor as far as the Republican ticket goes. And she's going to be contested by that Mike Lawler guy, who was the man at the front of that effort on that Israel bill the other day. I think it's like you can't even ask if someone was in AIPAC or something. It's illegal to say anything about Israeli influence. Let's continue.
And it's going to work out very well.
We're hearing some potential names. Stephen Miller's name, one of your longtime most loyal aides. His name has been talked about as a potential national security advisor. Is he someone you're looking at?
Well, I'd love to have Stephen there, but that would be a downgrade. Stephen is much higher in the totem pole than that, in my opinion.
Can you tell us who the front runner is right now?
I have a lot of people that want it. I will tell you, I have everybody calling. Everybody wants to be a part of this administration.
Can you tell us who the front runner is for national security advisor? On whose behalf is she asking that question? It can't be the people, because the people don't need Trump to name a front runner. They only need Trump to name who the nominee is when he decides to do it. What if you're in a position of decision-making authority and you haven't decided and someone asks you who the front runner is? What kind of person would answer that question? Unless you're trying to put a name out there to get some feedback from the country, from the people, from the audience. He says Stephen Miller, it would basically be a demotion to be national security advisor, because his position right now as deputy chief of staff of, I think it's immigration and national security or something along those lines, he's saying is a better position.
So at some point we'll, probably do that. There's a theory, Henry Kissinger did both. There's a theory that you don't need two people, but I think I have some really great people that could do a good job.
So Secretary Rubio could continue to have both jobs indefinitely?
He could, yeah, he could. But I think he even would like to probably see, because it is a little bit different. But in the meantime, he'll handle it. And I think Mike, if that goes forward, he still has to get approved. But I think Mike will do a very good job at the United Nations.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, obviously also on that unsecure text chain, he was sharing sensitive information. Are you looking for a new Secretary of Defense?
No, not even a little bit. No. Pete's going to be great.
His job is safe right now?
We're doing a fantastic job against the Houthis, who like blowing ships up and watching them sink in the ocean. We're hitting them very hard. No, he's doing a very good job.
His job is safe right now?
Totally safe.
Okay. Let's talk about the border.
Okay.
Let's talk about deportations.
We'll move on from that. So Pete Hegseth's job is totally safe. She is asking about who's going to staff these important national security positions, coveted positions for the regime, for the Republican establishment, the Uniparty establishment. These are the key positions that they've been going after this entire time. They're like begging him to remove Pete Hegseth. And he's like, no, there's no chance I'm going to do that. Sorry, there's no chance I'm going to do that. This was this is Donald Trump addressing Stephen Miller as a potential replacement for Mike Waltz yesterday on Air Force One.
Well, I have a lot of people that want the job, I can tell you. It's, a lot of people say it really works in with what Marco's doing. But
I'm gonna skip on that. I think that was its maximum volume, and I'm guessing that was probably a bit hard to hear for everybody. I'm certain that it's going to be hard to hear on the audio version of this later on. So in the interest of that and time, let's just keep moving forward. He addressed again the potential for investigations.
Do you think people should have the right to criticize you without fear of reprisal?
Absolutely, yeah, I do. That I do.
And how do you square
that? And I think that happens.
How do you square that with the fact that you have passed these executive orders asking the Attorney General to look into some of the people who've criticized you, who've been harshest against you?
I have been investigated more than any person in the history of the United States of America. I've been
to assert that he's investigating these people because they have criticized him is already a total lack of journalistic integrity and honesty. That is an incredibly dishonest and disrespectful question. These questions are unbelievable, and they're packaged in language that don't make them seem that way at all. And she is very polished and she is very calm throughout. She's very good at her very awful job.
Investigated more than the late, great, as I say at my rallies, Alphonse Capone. Alphonse Capone was a nasty man. He was the highest level gangster. And I have been investigated more than Al Capone, more than anybody. These people are evil people, and I won. And I'll tell you what, all I want to happen is for the Department of Justice and the FBI. Pam is great and Cash is great. I think they're two great people, but they're their own people. They want to do a fantastic job. And all I want to do and all I want to ask for is that they be allowed to do their job. I'm not telling them to do anything, and I believe I have the right to do it. I'm, in theory, the top law enforcement officer as the president. We went over this once before, and it turned out I was right. But I'm not looking to use that. We have two great people, and we have many, many incredible people under them, and I just want them to do their job and do it well.
So he's not demanding that they investigate. He's not putting any undue pressure. He's not putting any pressure, he says. Now, I mean, he's clearly directed them to investigate certain things, but he has the power to spend all his time directing them on what to investigate. That's well within his authority, and he is correct that he is the top law enforcement officer. These are not independent agencies of the federal government that can operate outside of the purview of the president. A couple more clips, and then we're going to wrap it up. He mentioned Governor Trudeau in the context of Greenland. There was a long segment on a number of geopolitical issues. Very interesting segment. Here's just a couple of minutes of that right now.
About making Canada the 51st state. There's obviously a new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, who you spoke to after his victory. He says that you didn't talk to him in that call about making Canada a 51st state.
No, he called me. He was very nice, and I congratulated him. He had a victory. It's a very close victory. It's, there's no majority or anything, so that's going to make things a little bit difficult, I think, for him to run. But he nevertheless had a victory, and he's a very nice man, I think.
Do you plan to talk to him about making Canada a 51st state?
He wants to come and see me. He's going to come this week or next week.
So will you talk to him about making Canada a 51st state, annexing Canada?
I'll always talk about that. You know why? We subsidize Canada to the tune of $200 billion a year. We don't need their cars. In fact, we don't want their cars. We don't need their energy. We don't even want their energy. We have more than they do. We don't want their lumber. We have great lumber. All I have to do is free it up from the environmental lunatics. We don't need anything that they have. We're giving them. I asked Mr. Trudeau, who I call Governor Trudeau. I said, not Prime Minister, Governor. I said, Governor Trudeau, could I ask you one question? Why are we giving you $200 billion? Why are we subsidizing Canada? If Canada was a state, it wouldn't cost us. It would be great. It would be such a great, it would be a cherished state. And if you look at our map, if you look at the geography, I'm a real estate guy at heart. When I look down at that, without that artificial line that was drawn with a ruler many years ago, it was just an artificial line, goes straight across. You don't even realize what a beautiful country it would be. It would be great. But I don't think the American public wants me to pay $200 billion a year to subsidize Canada. Again, remember this.
Yeah.
We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their energy. We don't need anything. We do very little business with Canada. They do all of their business practically with us. They need us. We don't need them.
You and I talked, and I asked you if you would rule out military force to take Greenland, and you said no, you don't rule out anything. Would you rule out military force to take Canada?
Well, I think we're not going to ever get to that point. It could happen. Something could happen with Greenland. I'll be honest. We need that for national and international security.
But not with
I think
Canada?
It's highly unlikely. I don't see it with Canada. I just don't see it. I have to be honest with you.
Okay, but you don't rule it out for Greenland.
And by the way, Canada, they spend less money on military than practically any nation in the world. They pay NATO less than any nation. They think we're subsidized. They think we are going to protect them. And really, we are. But the truth is, they don't carry their full share, and it's unfair to the United States and our taxpayers.
But you are not ruling out military force to take Greenland.
I don't rule it out. I don't say I'm going to do it, but I don't rule out anything. No, not there. We need that. We need Greenland very badly. Greenland is a very small amount of people, which we'll take care of and we'll cherish them and all of that. But we need that for international security. Do you know we have Russian boats and we have Chinese boats, gunships all over the place, aircraft carriers, gunships, going up and down the coast of Greenland. We need that to be protected. Internationally, we need it.
So you are willing to send U.S. troops to claim a sovereign territory?
I didn't say that. You asked me a question. Would you? Is there a circumstance? It could happen. I doubt it will, but it certainly could happen.
They're trying to create headlines. That's what she's trying to do. Just headlines. Trump said we don't need anything from Canada. And he's right. The stuff we import, we can just make here. And the truth is they need us and we don't need them. We defend them. They don't defend us. They spend very little on military. They spend very little on NATO. He also talked about the artificial line that was drawn. And that was another aspect of kind of the end of the Civil War. And so we have the Civil War, the Revolution, World War II, all of these important historical turning points in the life of this nation coming up again and again. All of the usurpations by the global regime against our country to thwart the American ideals, to usurp and overthrow the American government and the American Constitution the country's being educated on these now so that the people will support the unwinding of things as it progresses. We're going to keep seeing more of it. And I think Canada plays a part in that. It's maybe time to start focusing on some of that history. And by the way, Matt Ehret we didn't discuss this in our conversation on stage, but we did discuss it a bit previously, Canada's role in the American Civil War. And I'm sure, I would guess he's probably done some work on that I can find and locate somewhere. One more clip. She asked Donald Trump about whether or not he would run again in 2028.
Let me ask you, because we're nearing the end, just a couple more questions here.
I'm not complaining. You keep saying to me like I'm rushing.
No, you're not, and I really appreciate it.
I mean, she is just the worst. And she does keep acting like that. Like, oh, we're about to wrap it up. Oh, we're just going to do this. We need to do this in the interest of time. She cuts him off from doing certain answers. Okay, well, let's move on in the interest of time. And he never at any point suggested that he was anything other than totally available to answer all her questions.
Really appreciate
I don't want to
it.
make you nervous.
Thank you. The Trump organization is selling hats that say Trump 2028.
Yeah.
Are you seriously considering a third term, Mr. President, even though it's prohibited by the Constitution? Or is this about staying politically viable?
I will say this. So many people want me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I have never had requests so strong as that. But it's something that, to the best of my knowledge, you're not allowed to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's constitutional that they're not allowing you to do it or anything else, but there are many people selling the 2028 hat. But this is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have 4 great years and turn it over to somebody, ideally a great Republican to carry it forward. But I think we're going to have 4 years, and I think 4 years is plenty of time to do something really spectacular.
The Constitution does prohibit it. Some of your allies are pretty serious about this, though, Mr. President. I've spoken to them. They say they are coming up with potential ways.
Well,
obviously, the biggest one would be a constitutional amendment.
That's because they like the job I'm doing, and it's a compliment. It's really a great compliment.
Has anyone approached you, though, with an actual plan, a way to actually start the process
well, there are
of a
ways
constitutional
of doing it.
amendment?
There are ways of doing it, and you know the same thing. And if you look at the vice presidential thing and you hear different concepts and different other people say you can have a write-in vote. There's lots of different things. With all of that being said, I want to be a great president. I will have served. Hopefully, everything will go well. I feel very good. I just did a physical. I took, unlike all other presidents, I took cognitive tests and I aced it. I got 100% correct. And one doctor said, there were numerous doctors watching. And he said, I've never seen that before. Biden didn't take a cognitive. He couldn't have gotten the first question right. But I came out great with the physical, both physically and mentally. And I just want to serve do a great job. I'll be an 8-year president. I'll be a 2-term president. I always thought that was very important, to be honest with you. You know, if you look at President Polk, he was a 1-termer and he did some great things, actually. Pretty good president. And I'm not saying you can't do that, but there's something about being a 2-term president that was very important to me.
And just to put a button on it, has anyone in an official capacity presented you with, sir, here are some ideas by which you could actually get a constitutional amendment?
Well, in a capacity of being a big supporter, many people have said different things, but I'm not looking at that.
You haven't had official meetings about it?
No. And just so you said, 4 years is a long time. I have almost 4 years. You know, all of these things that we've done more than any president, and even you might admit that. Nobody's done the extent of the things that we've done. Nobody's done this in essentially a little bit more than 3 months. As they say, 100 days. I'm looking to do a great job as president and set the country on the right track, because if I didn't win, this country would have failed. We would have been a failed nation.
You have built a political movement that has transformed the Republican Party.
Industry.
It's transformed the country, quite frankly.
The greatest political movement in history. And so he says he's not looking to run again in 2028. He hopes to pass it off to some great Republican. And it's good that he's not going to focus on this. I don't think it's going to matter. Don't think that Steve Bannon is just making it up when he's confident and sure that Donald Trump will still be there. We're in a different situation, and we're going to keep watching it as it evolves. All right, everybody, I hope you had a good time over in the chat today. I will be back on Wednesday for the subscriber stream at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can see that if you are a paid Substack subscriber. You can watch that on Substack. Or if you also have Rumble Premium, you can watch it on Rumble Premium. If you only have Rumble Premium, you're not going to get the link. And so you're not going to end up seeing it. And then it will be released publicly and streamed on a replay will be streamed on Sunday. So I will be back on Wednesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the rain.